Good evening, wherever you happen to be across the southern interior, BC, across Canada, or for you snowbirds south of the border. Welcome to Castanet's live coverage of the 2025 federal election. I'm Wayne Moore, along with former Kelowna City Manager Ron Mattiussi, and Castanet's Al Waters will be here for much of the evening as Canada decides who our next Prime Minister will be and whether we'll have a majority or a minority government, and we'll get into that in just a moment. Before we get started, though, on behalf of the three of us here, I want to send out our special condolences and heartfelt condolences to the Filipino community after the tragic events of Saturday. Our thoughts, our prayers are with those who lost family members, friends, and loved ones in a senseless act, and our thoughts are with you. Gentlemen, the voting is almost done. The polls have closed in Atlantic Canada, Ontario, Quebec, and as we speak, they have now closed in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Alberta. BC polls will close in about a half hour. We've got some preliminary results. Well, let's speak on what we see so far with the Liberals. I mean, it's real early. It's Atlantic Canada and parts of Quebec, but 24, Conservatives 11, the Bloc 2. Any early thoughts before we get into the local scene, Mr. Mattiussi?
Well, for me, it looks pretty close. I mean, in terms of some of those rides, I think it's early. I guess, watched enough elections like yourself to know that, you know, until you know exactly how many of the votes are actually in, it's really hard to look at. But it does seem to be creeping up now from the last time I looked. And
every time you look up something new,
it's creeping up a bit. So yeah, I think you know, at this point in time, it's Atlantic Canada, and it's supposed to be strong for the Liberals, and it looks like it's coming in there.
I think the real kind of sort of meat of this is going to be Quebec and then Ontario. And the saying goes that, you know, if you win Ontario, you win the election, and if you win Quebec, it's a majority or a minority, depending on. So I think we're gonna get a pretty good idea once those results start to roll in.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, if we were sitting here 6 months ago, I think we would be, you know, very safe to say a Conservative landslide.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
you know, as events happen, Justin Trudeau steps down. Mark Carney takes over. Donald Trump injects himself into this campaign, which has, you know, really turned the campaign on its head. I know, listening to CNN this morning, and John King, who came to Ontario and BC to talk to some of the electorate, his comment when asked was, and he said, I didn't think I would ever make a comment like this, that Donald Trump has injected himself and unified the country. Not their country, but our country.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that really, I think, has been, if not the key, a major key to this election is Donald Trump's not on the ballot, but in a lot of people's minds, he might as well be.
Well, the last Leger poll that came out late last week, it was still the #1 issue among Canadians. 43% said that you know, our sovereignty was the #1 issue. Interestingly enough, 53% of Liberals believe that. Only 20% of Conservatives believe that.
And you look at how the campaign has sort of gone so far. Carney has really focused big time on Trump and the tariffs and trade. Poilievre hasn't really done that. He's been more change. We want change from what he views as problems over the last 10 years with the Liberal government. And neither one of them has really pivoted that much from those two positions, which in some ways may have hurt the Conservatives in that people do have Trump on their mind.
Of course, we are sitting here in downtown Kelowna, the seat of Conservative politics, some of the safer Conservative ridings in BC and in Canada in some respects. That's where a lot of our focus obviously is tonight, in the 7 ridings throughout the South Okanagan the Southern Interior. In our coverage area, Kelowna, Okanagan Lake West, South Kelowna, Similkameen, South Okanagan, West Kootenay, Kamloops, Shuswap, Central Rockies, Kamloops, Nicola, or Thompson, Nicola, Kootenay, Southern Rockies, and the Vernon riding as well. And we do have some previews that our news directors from each of the markets have put together. And let's take a look at the two ridings up in the northern reaches of our coverage area in Kamloops and Shuswap, both very conservative areas. And let's hear what's going on up there.
No matter who is elected tonight, the two MPs for the Kamloops region will be representing communities in a pair of new and expansive ridings. Changes to the federal electoral map means the city of Kamloops has been split into two, with the dividing line here along 6th Avenue downtown. To the west is Kamloops-Thompson-Nicola, a riding which includes Merritt and Lillooet and stretches to Blue River in the north. Here, incumbent Conservative Frank Caputo, former Crown Prosecutor, is hoping for re-election.
Next thing I want to tackle are local issues in terms of housing, resource development, jobs, affordability, but continuing on the same vein, on the criminal end of things, bail is a really big issue, and also raising sentences on sexual offenses.
He's joined by Ian Curry, another former Crown Prosecutor who is representing for the Liberals this election after running for the Green Party in the past.
I'm excited about talking to people and advocating for the billions of dollars which are promised to new housing for that to come to Kamloops. So I think that's a wonderful opportunity in the face of risk to improve the country and also to create great jobs in this area.
Chris Enns is running for the PPC, Miguel Gadao for the NDP, and Jenna Lindley for the Green Party. MP candidates say public safety, housing, and affordability have been top issues for voters in this riding.
I'd like to enact the People's Party platform of putting the moratorium on immigration until our housing crisis is settled. And I would like to clean up the fentanyl crisis, and I would like to secure our borders.
My job would be to looking at getting non-market homes within our area that provide accessible housing for working families, for seniors, for people who are income struggling.
There are 5 candidates vying to represent the Kamloops-Shuswap Central Rockies riding in Ottawa, which starts here and extends all the way to the Alberta border. It includes the cities of Salmon Revelstoke, and Golden, as well as Enderby and Sicamous. Incumbent Conservative Mel Arnold is up against the Liberal Party's Ken Robertson, Phaedra Idzan with the NDP, Owen Madden for the Green Party, and PPC candidate Michael Henry. Affordability, particularly for seniors and rural residents, was also a top issue for these candidates, as well as American tariffs and housing.
We obviously have to ensure those who are possibly going to be facing some real choices coming up, that they have the services available through EI, through apprenticeship programs, through different means of jobs, but we still want to hold on to those forestry jobs that are well paying.
To help businesses succeed, we need to reduce red tape and make it worthwhile to be in business. Businesses have been attacked by the current Liberal government, former Prime Minister calling them tax cheats.
We will have no income tax for anyone that earns $40,000 or less. And we will tax the corporations and the larger wealth owners in this nation who basically can't afford to have a tax increase.
I think we need to build more homes. We need to build them quicker and faster and more efficiently. We need to support first-time home buyers.
Is that we want to avoid a trade war. I don't think that we can win one with the United States. We want free trade with no tariffs at the end of the day.
Polls are open until 7 p.m. Pacific Time. For Castanet News in Kamloops, I'm Josh Dawson.
Thank you very much, Josh Dawson. Up in Kamloops, the two ridings, both held by Conservatives. Mel Arnold, who was the former Vernon Monashee MP, is running now in Kamloops-Shuswap Central Rockies, and Frank Caputo, the Conservative MP. I would suggest safe Conservative ridings.
Yeah, I think that much of the BC interior is pretty safe for the Conservatives, and I think those are two that have been traditionally Conservative, and unless there's some upending happening, it's going to be continuing.
And I'm certainly not hearing anything in those particular areas that are any different than the rest of the interior as you're talking about.
And I know you've, over the years in your role with the City of Kelowna, you've had some dealings with Mel Arnold. I'm not sure about Frank Caputo, but
No, not Frank, no.
But,
yeah, again, I think the cities are very, very different, but at the end of the day, different economies and a lot of different things, but when you look at the national level, some of the things that will impact regions, I think that they're not that varied, right? So I think nothing's probably going to change within those areas.
No. Next up, Vernon, which does not have an incumbent, but the heavy favorite is the city councillor, Scott Anderson, running for the Conservatives, looking to take over the riding that was at least partially Mel Arnold's. And let's hear about the Vernon riding.
Here in the new Vernon Lake Country Monashee riding, 4 candidates are vying for a seat in Ottawa. Changes to electoral boundaries have split Vernon from the Shuswap, and former MP Mel Arnold has chosen to run up in the Shuswaps, leaving the Vernon Lake Country Monashee riding wide open. The area has long voted Conservative, and former Vernon City Councillor and Tory candidate Scott Anderson is the frontrunner.
I think federal politics is where I gravitate toward because my education is in strategic studies, which deals at a national level, so I've always kind of swum in those waters.
Anderson has faced criticism this election for not attending some candidate forums or responding to questionnaires intended to help inform voters. He's not the only one facing criticism. Liberal candidate Anna Warwick-Sears, the former executive director of the Okanagan Basin Water Board, raised eyebrows when putting her name forward to run for the federal Liberals after her unsuccessful campaign with the provincial NDP this past fall.
So much has changed since last fall, and right now it really legitimately seems like if we're engaging in super partisan politics, we're like rearranging deck chairs in the Titanic.
Blair Vischer is running for the Green Party. She's currently working towards her master's in sustainability and has spent the past year as the CEO for the local Green Party Riding Association.
Feels like such a fraught time right now. So much is happening, and I really feel strongly that when we feel like things are getting out of our control, they're not what we want, that's the time to lean in.
Rounding out the ballot is current Silverton councillor and former director with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, Leah Main for the NDP.
I have experience in working with the federal government, in working with ministers and MPs and senators, and the level of discourse is just so rich.
The riding originally had 2 additional candidates, Arsh Dillon with the People's Party of Canada and Corey Zepik running as an independent. Both candidates withdrew before Election Canada's confirmation deadline, with Zepik throwing his support behind the Liberal Party's Anna Warwick-Sears. For Castanet, I'm Chelsea Mutter in Vernon.
Thank you very much. Chelsea Mutter up in Vernon for the Vernon Lake Country and Shuswap riding, an area, Lake Country, that was taken away from the Kelowna riding. They took away Lake Country, added Beaverdale.
Makes total sense to me.
I think a lot of people shook their head when they saw that, especially adding a rural area that, as we've talked off air, has nothing to do and no correlation whatsoever with the more urban areas. Their issues are very divergent.
Yeah, no, I've seen this before, both at the provincial and federal level, and the boundaries come out and you just shake your head.
Mm-hmm.
And I worry, certainly as a city manager, I was worried about Kelowna citizens being disenfranchised. If a portion of your community gets hived off and added to a larger area, now all of a sudden are your issues going to be swept away by in one case it was West Kelowna, in another case it was Lake Country, right? So I really do have to wonder about the rationale.
Because that's exactly what we have here. We have Lake Country, which I would say definitely identifies more closely with Kelowna.
Absolutely.
And then of course you have for the riding on covering West Kelowna, you've got South Kelowna being part of that riding.
Mm-hmm.
So I realize why they have to do what they have to do when it comes to redistribution, but you do look at the carving up of the ridings and go, okay, how are the people there going to feel about having a representative who is representing Vernon or Monashee?
Yeah, I mean, it's all population when they do the redistribution. But I remember speaking with Tracy Gray, who's the current Kelowna Lake Country MP. Her riding at dissolution was the second largest population-wise riding in the province, second only to Vernon by a couple of hundred people. Now you look at the populations in the newly redistributed ridings across the province, it's now the smallest population-wise. Well, it has grown, but everybody else has grown leaps and bounds.
And maybe it makes more sense, if you think of Southern Ontario, if you think of prairies, if you draw the boundary here, well now, Wainwright's in, but not out.
Exactly.
But it's still a farm town in middle of Alberta.
Sure.
But when you get in BC and you have to think, and look at some of our geography and you start looking at Beaverdale, it's not even close. I mean, there's nothing in common and it's not close.
Well, I mean, Dan Elvis, again, a disillusionment. His large riding, large area-wise, but you look at the communities. You get a Logan Lake, a Merida, Princeton, even to some degree West Kelowna, Summerland, Peachland, smaller communities with maybe some issues that are like-minded.
Yes.
West Kelowna being the outlier there, but again, Beaverdale, small community. Big White, a tourist community, resort community, and then Big Brother in Kelowna, and it's just it does make you shake your head.
Which also, of course, puts extra stress on whoever does become the MLA to represent all of those views as one MLA covering such a large area,
Sure. Want to shift our focus south to a couple of ridings. The Similkameen, South Okanagan, West Kootenay. That's Richard Canning's former riding or former area. The NDP MP has called it a career, has stepped down and is not running. Helena Conans, the Conservative candidate, and some controversy there as she was selected. There was no nomination process per se, and I'm sure we'll hear about that in our preview. And also the Columbia Kootenay Southern Rockies, again, 2 seats that the Conservatives are hoping to pick up, add one to the column, and also hold on to one. So here's a look at that riding, or those ridings.
It used to be the battle of the blue and orange, but newly drawn boundaries and a national wave of Liberal support may shake things up in 2 interior border ridings. In the Similkameen, South Okanagan, West Kootenay, the bulk of the area has been NDP since 2015. With new boundaries, the riding encompasses much more of the Similkameen Valley, which has historically leaned Conservative. Penticton City Councillor Helena Conans is taking her 3rd shot at election with the Conservative Party. Conans has been noticeably absent from the All Candidates forums or debates in the riding and declined media interviews during her campaign. Challenging her is Linda Sankey with the NDP.
We have had a history of being able to beat the Conservatives in this riding. I think the biggest thing we can do there is be the voice and ensure that government knows what's going on so we can respond to their needs.
In the last 2 federal elections, the Liberals have finished a distant 3rd. Gloria Morgan, who does not currently live in the riding, wants to change all of that.
I really believe, and I've always believed, that if you want a voice in any level of government, you have to be fully in and fully participating. And that's what I would be as a federal MP in this riding, especially with such a strong Prime Minister. I don't want us divided. I want to help remove barriers between provinces and regions. I want to see our country grow, make it strong, but do it together.
Also running is Philip Mansfield with the Green Party and Barry Dewar with the People's Party of Canada. In the riding next door in the Columbia Kootenay Southern Rockies, longtime Conservative MP Rob Morrison is hoping to be re-elected. He is challenged by Liberal Reggie Goldsbury, NDP Kaylee Linz, Green Stephen Maffioli, and Independent James Wiedrich. The riding with its previous boundaries was contested by the NDP in 2021, with the Liberals falling short.
As votes come in, it will be interesting to see if change comes to these 2 long-standing party strongholds. For Castanet News, I'm Casey Richardson.
Thank you, Casey, and thank you, Sarah, for those previews. A problem, or not, I guess, from a media standpoint, we say this is a problem. We're seeing mainly on the Conservative side, but we're seeing it, leak over into others as well. Candidates ignoring all candidates' meetings, ignoring reporters' questions, phone calls, emails with questionnaires, et cetera, et cetera. How big a problem do you see this as far as the electorate is concerned? It's got to be concerning if you're trying to get information and you can only get it on their personal website.
Yeah, I look at it and I think it is concerning. I think it is a problem. Unfortunately, we see we're already a bit polarized in that, depending which party it is, it's not a problem at all. Yeah. And so, therein lies a bit of the problem. I do worry because, I think there are some things that are important. Having an all candidates meeting, I think that serves an actual purpose. Mm-hmm. And so, I worry about the trend, and I guess more importantly, in any given election, you might not be able to make it, although it's, most people will.
Yeah.
But the fact that it's just across the board, I find troubling.
Well, and I'm wondering too, and John Rustad was asked the question numerous times by reporters, are you muzzling your candidates during the provincial election? He said no, and you take him at his word. Mm-hmm. I haven't heard the question asked of Mr. Poilievre federally, but again, it's you're almost dumbing down to the electorate by saying, it doesn't mean you're just going to vote for the party anyway, and I'm your party, so I don't have to open my mouth.
And I think that's probably the biggest problem with this, is that it really does a disservice to the voter in that they don't get to see how the candidate responds when they're asked a direct question, when they're asked a question in a public forum. How do they respond? Do they know what they're talking about? How does this go? And unfortunately, and we saw it a lot with the provincial election, and we've seen it to a degree here in different ridings, more so than other ridings, because there are some ridings mm-hmm. where candidates have mm-hmm. shown up and have talked to the public. But I think it is a problem that seems to be coming more accepted by candidates, that this is an acceptable way to run, and like you say, almost taking it for granted that candidates, voters are going to vote party, not necessarily candidate. So whoever is running, we think we have your vote. We don't need to necessarily be as accountable during an election campaign as candidates have in the past.
And there's a feeling out there too that, if you have a lead in the polls, per se, mm-hmm. The easiest way to lose that lead is to say something mm-hmm. that you shouldn't say. Mm-hmm. So if you keep your mouth shut, mm-hmm. you eliminate that.
Mm-hmm. But I think you can do that and still be seen by the voters as being out there too. When you're not seen by the voters, I don't think that strategy necessarily helps you, because why aren't they out there? It becomes the question, as opposed to what are they saying?
Yeah.
I think a lot of it, is hiding, and we hear a lot about, depending on the parties, the traditional media, as we sit here in a very non-traditional form of media, but the traditional media, the false, and but I look at it, and whether it's Castanet or the Globe and Mail or they all have journalists, right? They have some mm-hmm. kind of standard, and I really don't want to see it, disaggregate down to a bunch of guys with opinions out there.
Sure.
I may not like the position of the National Post. I may not like, the editorial of the Globe and Mail, but I know that they are legitimate journalists who are trying, and mm-hmm. everybody has a bias, and so it really worries me that trend is out there, because as a citizen and as a person who has to absorb news, I would still much rather get it from a source that I trust.
And it's very easy to have the whole fake news
exactly.
blast, which in a lot of ways has become code, or not so much code, for news that I don't like.
Yeah.
So
or can't control.
So I call it fake because I disagree with this, and it speaks kind of to the polarization that we're beginning to see politically, more so in Canada than we've seen before, which is following hot on the heels of what's very big down south of us in the U.S.
Well, I think what you're going to end up seeing is, if this strategy works, and we saw it work provincially, locally as a matter of fact, in the provincial election, if it continues to work, it'll only snowball.
Proliferate,
in
yeah.
It'll
elections
polarize.
to come.
It'll just
Exactly.
polarize,
Yeah.
and people won't do what we want them to do, which is like look at the platforms, look at what people are saying. Right?
Exactly. You know, because they need to when you put yourself out there to ask for voters to vote for you, they need something to vote for.
Yes.
And unfortunately, a lot of times we vote against something as opposed to vote for something.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if we necessarily benefit from that, because the people who you're voting in and the party that ends up running, they will be making decisions that you're going to be living with for 4 years. So you should know what you're getting when you vote.
7.3 million people voted last weekend. 62, just over 62% of the country of those eligible voted in the last election. So hopefully that number increases this time around. And there are those that believe that this could be a very large turnout because of the stakes. It is 6:55, which means there are 5 minutes to go in the polls or at the polling stations before voting is cut off in our part of the country, and that will be we're the only ones left still voting. Those that are at the polling booths at 7 o'clock will in line will still be able to vote after that. But then it's time for the ballot counting. Leading up to that, we have two ridings in Kelowna. We have the Kelowna riding, which used to be Kelowna Lake Country. Now it's just Kelowna, which includes a chunk of the city, plus, as we've mentioned, that little sliver down Highway 33 going to Big White and Beaverdale, and also the Okanagan Lake West, South Kelowna riding. Tracy Gray is the Conservative MP, the incumbent in the Kelowna riding, and she has a battle in her hands with Stephen Fuhr, the former Member of Parliament, Liberal Member of Parliament, who unseated Ron Cannon in 2015, and Dan Albus is the incumbent in the Okanagan Lake West South Kelowna riding. And let's hear a preview on our ridings here in Kelowna.
Affordability and the economic impact of the tariff war with the U.S. dominated this federal election campaign, and it was no different in the two Kelowna area ridings. In the new Kelowna riding, Tracy Gray, the Conservative incumbent, was in a tight race with former Liberal MP Stephen Fuhr, who she replaced in 2019.
Well, I would say the biggest issues that I hear right now, right across the board, fall within a few different categories. Mm-hmm. And that relates to affordability, right, crime, right, mental health and addiction, and then now uncertainty with the unjustified trade tariffs, trade dispute with mm-hmm. the United States.
If we don't solve this problem, everything else that falls underneath that, all the kitchen table things, all the things that matter to us day to day, will be affected by that. It'll be infinitely harder to fix housing, to give people good, or to allow people to have good jobs. Think about anything else that we do day to day that would be easier if our economy is in big trouble. So that's the problem we need to fix right now. It's urgent.
New to the ballot are Green Party contender Katrina Wright and the NDP's Trevor McAleese.
If we're looking at ways to provide relief for people today, things that will actually have some kind of a noticeable difference in their bills month to month, I think that these things are worth pursuing. Because after all, the carbon tax, the industrial carbon tax remains in place, and really it's the big emitters that we need to be focusing our attention on, more than trying to address, or than making consumers and working people pay for it.
Dan Albus returns as the Conservative candidate in the redrawn Okanagan Lake West South Kelowna riding. He's concerned skyrocketing costs are forcing young families out of BC.
They can't get into a house, and so they're asking, should I stay in British Columbia or should I, go to some place like Alberta? And their grandparents and their parents often don't have the money to finance a down payment through the bank of mom and dad.
Liberal candidate Juliette Seacott argues that Mark Carney has given people a lot of hope at a time of uncertainty.
And what I'm hearing on the doorsteps is that people are concerned and they're having a tough time sleeping, but they feel a reassurance that Mark Carney is leading the Liberal Party.
Also on the ballot in the riding are the Green Party's Louise Lecouf, Debbie Robinson with the People's Party of Canada, Gary Suttard of the Canadian Future Party, and the NDP's Harpreet Badahal. Badahal says while affordability is the main issue he's hearing about, voters should also be concerned about the maintenance of services that could be under threat depending on who wins the election.
Economy should not become a reason to cut the essential services to people.
Voter turnout was strong during the advanced polls with lineups at many polling stations. Whether that continued on Election Day, we will have to wait to get the official results from Elections Canada.
Cindy White reporting on the two Kelowna ridings, Kelowna per se, and also Okanagan Lake West, South Kelowna. If you look at Canada 338, they call the Kelowna riding a toss-up, a repeat, a rerun of the 2019 election in which Tracy Gray unseated Stephen Fuhr, the first Liberal MP in this riding in decades. You see this as being a nail-biter?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I think they're both strong candidates. I've worked with both of them. You know, there's to me, you know, either one are very good candidates. So it's going to be close. I think the Liberals in this case have to really lean on, you know, again, the collapse of the NDP and the votes of the progressive Conservatives. I mean, there's an element out there of former progressive Conservatives that might be more comfortable with Carney. So if Fuhr wins, it'll be that combination, right?
And we have, I mean, the city of Kelowna per se is skewing younger.
Yes.
We were, you know, a very old community and skewing older. I believe the average age at one time back in the early 2000s was the high 50s, early 60s, and trending up. That trend has started to go down, and you see a slight change in voting patterns. I'm not saying that we're not as not a conservative stronghold, but it seems like that stranglehold has maybe lessened just a little bit.
I think that especially Kelowna, I mean, traditionally has been, I think you have to say, a conservative stronghold.
Absolutely.
Christy Clark picked it when she needed a seat.
Federal elections. Where I saw a bit of a change to that was in the last provincial election, where an NDP candidate ran an extremely close race with a traditionally conservative candidate, which in the past would have been, to be honest, unheard of. That gave an indication that demographically that area, and it isn't, I realize it's not exactly the same riding boundaries, but that gave an indication that there is that change happening here. And I would think that that probably gave hope to Stephen Fuhr, thinking, I can get back into this, and maybe it won't be a repeat of what happened to him after one term, where it went back to being a conservative seat. That he had a chance to get back in there because of what the NDP candidate was able to do provincially in the last election.
Yeah, I think, you know, if you look at our demographics, I've been here 30 years now. If you look at our demographics, I mean, it changes, and a lot of our earlier, you know, residents who moved in came from Alberta. So it just perpetuated the fact that we were always small C conservative. Now we brought more small C conservative people to the valley. And so I don't think things changed, but I think you saw the change with Stephen Fuhr's first win. That was really the outcome of the university, the colleges expanding, the hospital expanding, and you brought, I mean, this city's growing. And so that small group of people that may have been the Socrat heartland is now just a small portion of a bigger city.
I do think a large helper for him, though, at that time when he did get in, was definitely that what they described as that red wave across Canada, and that kind of Trudeau mania version 2. And if he is to be successful tonight, I think that some of the, for want of a better term, Carney mania, at least amongst Liberal supporters, that is going to have to help him as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that'll be interesting to see is, does the Conservative vote hold here, or do we find the Kelowna riding particularly getting swept up in what may happen in the rest of Canada, where polls at least indicate the Liberals are a popular choice.
Well, it's going to be interesting, and it is 7:05, so the polls have closed. You're watching Castanet's live coverage of the 2025 federal election. I'm Wayne Moore, along with former Kelowna City Manager Ron Mattiussi, who also takes part in a monthly podcast, I believe.
I do.
One
foot off center.
1 foot off center.
I better get that
one
right.
step to the left.
I better get it right. Well, I think they wanted to make it one step to the right, but it just hasn't worked out always.
And Castanet reporter Al Waters. We joked a while ago about, 6 months ago, this would have been a conservative landslide.
Yeah.
Now, most pundits are predicting a Liberal majority, some suggesting a Liberal minority perhaps, but not many are predicting a Conservative majority or minority. And as we sit right now, where the polls have closed everywhere, voting has started to count, obviously in Ontario and Quebec, Atlantic Canada, it's well underway. On the prairies, getting going now. The Liberals with 108 elected or leading. The Conservatives, 83 elected or leading. The Bloc, 16. But the interesting one is the NDP.
Mm-hmm.
New Democratic Party, 3 leading, none elected. I don't want to suggest that we're shifting to a U.S. style of federalism where it's 2 parties. But this election, it seems it's come down to, again, if you believe the Trump influence, that it's come down to which leader can deal with Donald Trump best, and it's one of the two. Who can be prime minister? And the thought is the NDP. You may like their policies, you might like Jagmeet Singh as a leader, but the feeling is he would not win an election. So we need to vote in somebody, and there's a lot of people I know that are NDP Green supporters
Mm-hmm.
that have said no. We need somebody to deal with that guy down there, and anybody but Mr. Polyev.
Yeah.
And I think that there are a number of elements of this election that are very, very different than past elections, not the least of which was the very substantial lead that the Conservatives had prior to Carney becoming the leader. We wouldn't be talking about expecting the kind of result that polls have led us to believe could very well happen tonight. 3 months ago, we wouldn't have been thinking that. But we also never would have thought that we would have had the head of state of another country, in essence, inject himself into
redraw the boundaries
into our federal election, and galvanize a country the way that they have. I mean, I saw one comment.
Elbows up, everybody.
I saw one comment that said, there must be something happening here if he can make people in Quebec feel that they are now more part of Canada than they are of voting for a separatist party, the Bloc Québécois. Obviously, that has had a great unifying effect on Canada. And I think that this election, another example is the advance polls. Normally, a very heavy advance poll, which we had, indicates you're trying to vote out a government.
Right.
That doesn't seem to necessarily be the case of trying to vote out a government. Once again, if polls are to be believed, and that's what we've got to go on so far, the numbers are beginning to come in, and we'll see if they pan out.
Well, not only seat-wise, but also popular vote-wise. Again, with what's been counted so far, the Liberals have 50.4% of the popular vote through much of Atlantic Canada and through Ontario and Quebec, and the Conservatives 38.5%. Now that's a lot. The spread is a lot larger than the polls indicate.
Yeah.
But we have yet to really get into that voter-rich prairies as far as the Conservatives are concerned. So,
I think the other thing about this election, I think it's a completely unique election. So I don't think you can read too much into those cards, because I think you have an imminent threat by Donald Trump. But to me, the bigger threat, when I hear people say, who could handle him? Nobody could handle Donald Trump.
No.
Nobody. The more important question is, who can handle the country when he throws at us what he's going to throw at us? And I think that's the real Donald Trump factor, is what do you do when he throws stuff at you, as opposed to, what he does when he calls or says something stupid. So that, I think, that's the here and now. If I was the NDP, I would not necessarily think all is lost. Maybe all is lost this time, for sure. But we have an election, the government will form. Quite frankly, whoever wins this is going to be very unpopular at some point in time. Because if people actually think of the impacts that are occurring, people are being laid off today in Windsor as we speak. Whatever government is in place is going to be doing some very harsh things, and the Canadian people, my God, we couldn't pay carbon tax. It was the end of the world. Are they really ready for what it may take to survive in the next few years? So, be careful what you wish for. Whoever wins this is going to have a tough time.
But you've been around long enough to know that the expectations on the night of an election are very different than the expectations even a month or two after that election.
Well, that 100-day barrier. Right?
The expectations that people have tonight of whoever is going to be leading the party that is going to form the next government, they think that they're going to get Donald Trump on the phone and they're going to say, stop the tariffs, and tariffs will stop, and that's not going to happen.
Well, that's a good point you make too about, as far as the NDP is concerned, the sun will rise tomorrow. We've seen the death of the Conservative Party on more than one occasion. We've seen the death of the Liberal Party, and they rise, they fall, they rise, they fall, and we've talked about this many times. How the shelf life of a government is probably 1.5 terms. If you could be elected for 6 years, and then you're gone. That would almost be the perfect shelf life for any government.
Even in municipal elections, 2 terms. Well, 2 terms is pretty much the shelf life. Even extremely popular mayors never made it through the 3rd term, right? So I think that holds out.
Yeah, and it's tough to get things. It's tough to make change.
Yes.
Unfortunately, and sometimes, you rue the fact that it's a politician that's making decisions on housing. A politician that's making decisions on, drug use and drug abuse and mental health and those kind of issues, where it should be, somebody in the industry, maybe a blue ribbon panel or something along those lines, that you give the reins to, and have them come back to you every couple of years, and here's what we've done, here's how we're doing. Keep going, or let's find somebody else.
And also in this election, when we talk about the NDP. A lot of their support has dropped, but where has it gone to? It appears that it's going to the Liberals, which would indicate almost like strategic voting. That rather than voters park their vote with the NDP, who voters may believe in their message, believe in their platform, believe in what they want, they're looking at it and going, okay, we know they're not going to form the government, so which one of the Liberals or Conservatives is? Who would we rather see in there? Instead of voting for the NDP, we'll move it to the Liberals. And that is what we appear to be seeing, and what we appear to have heard throughout the whole election campaign.
Well, and if you recall, the interview I did with Trevor McAleese, who's the NDP candidate in the Kelowna riding, and I asked him specifically, because their vote base is starting to shift to the Liberals for,
strategically.
Strategically. Why are you running? Are you not concerned about splitting the vote? And he said no, because he wants to give people that are disenfranchised, which is a very noble idea. But he also at the same time said, anybody but the Conservatives, and that's coming from the NDP. So, and that's where a lot of their base is, as you said, parking their vote.
If I can just cut in here, apparently, even though we're so early in the process, apparently CTV has already called it for the Liberals at this point.
Really?
Believe it or not.
But do they have the gumption to say minority or majority? They're just saying the Liberals will form government one way or the other.
It is very early, but they've decided to say that publicly. So
Okay, well, we're
not.
we're not.
No, stay with us all night. We'll be here till 2 a.m. We're talking a lot about Donald Trump and his influence on the election, and over the last couple of weeks talking to the candidates, his name has come up.
Yes.
And I asked Dan Albus specifically about comparisons of his leader, Pierre Poilievre, with Donald Trump, and here's what he had to say.
First of all, it seems that it doesn't matter who we put up for a prime minister. They seem to find a way to demonize that individual. But you know what? The one thing I would say about Pierre Poilievre is he's grown as a person. Ever since he met his wife, Anna, she was a Venezuelan refugee, came to Canada, essentially the Canadian story here. And now the two of them are working to try and turn this country around for their children, and that's a very hopeful message. When he talks about, we want to restore the promise of Canada, that anyone from anywhere can achieve anything. That's the things that I like to hear from Pierre Poilievre. Now, can he be tough on Justin Trudeau? Absolutely. But that toughness, for example, when he challenged Justin Trudeau and the Liberals on the carbon tax, look where we are today. Suddenly people are going to start getting some relief at the pumps. That is a Conservative victory.
He's gone.
That's Dan Albus, the incumbent in the Okanagan Lake West, South Kelowna riding. I've just been getting used to the old riding names, and boom, they slide the new ones in.
I know.
So CTV now has joined CBC, and I'm assuming the other outlets as well. It's refreshing, Al. It'll take a while. Are calling a Liberal victory. They're not saying yet minority, just a Liberal win. Obviously, their metrics are showing that there's enough support, and what we saw before the CBC site froze on me was just slightly more than 50% of the popular vote. Now, I mentioned that's going to slide down a bit as we get to the prairies and that area. But surprise?
No, I mean, I looked at the polling today, and it was sort of the last run-up, and virtually every poll, the 12 or whatever they showed, it went from a +2 to 6.
Yeah.
So there was an absolute consistency on it, at least a win, which there were no outliers, and so from that point of view, no, I think it's starting to play out as as they were predicted, as they all predicted in some form or another.
And I think the obviously we've seen with the latest numbers that we have here, the predicted collapse of the NDP has manifested. I mean, I'm looking at this now, and the 3 seats that they're leading in, and I believe it's 12 seats you need to be a recognized party in the House of Commons.
Yes.
They have literally seen their support totally evaporate.
So at dissolution, it was 153 for the Liberals, 120 for the Conservatives, 33 Bloc, 24 NDP, 2 Green, 3 Independents. As it sits right now, elected or leading, the Liberals 136, Conservatives 99, the Bloc 20, NDP 3 in that last report that was leading, and 3 elected 0. We do have some preliminary local results, or regional results, I should say. Vernon Lake Country, Monashee, Scott Anderson, who is a current city councillor in Vernon, with 66.89%. Blair Vischer, the Green Party candidate, with 27.09%. Anna Warwick Sears, the Liberal, with 2%. And the NDP candidate, Leah Ellen Main, with 4%. Similkameen, South Okanagan, Kootenay, where Helena Conans is hoping to take that seat, put it in the win column for the Conservatives. That's Richard Canning's, no relation. The NDP MP's riding. He's retired. Helena Conans trails just slightly, 37.95%, 38.6%. Gloria Morgan, the Liberal candidate, leading there. Linda Sankey is further behind with 20%. So those are the results that we have so far, as I say, very preliminary, and just waiting on other numbers from the other 5 ridings. So it looks like we will have a Liberal government, one way or the other, minority, majority. So Preston Manning brought up the, careful, if you vote in a Liberal government, there will be Western alienation. Yeah. I don't know if he's looking for headlines, looking to be relevant again, or whatever the case may be, but scary talk, but I mean, it's never gone anywhere before. I can't imagine it going anywhere again.
As Andrew Coyne said, he should check the polls.
Yeah.
Because in fact, it's a very small minority of the population of Alberta at this point in time feels that, and that percentage always was there. And, this is Preston Manning's raison d'etre. I mean, he formed a party.
The West wants in.
Which the West want, the Reform Party that became the Alliance and became the Conservatives.
Right.
So certainly. Now, having said that, I think that. If Carney, in the role as Prime Minister, does anything to help shift, paying attention to those issues. I mean, Alberta and the West really have real issues, and sometimes I feel, that those issues are blown up because, of course, the Premier of Alberta has never lost by not picking a fight with the federal government. So I think that's an issue. But I think this is a real opportunity for Carney as a Edmontonian, as a Westerner, to at least really try to get to the heart of some of these matters.
And I think that, especially Alberta and Saskatchewan, that's where the Conservatives are very likely to hold on to. I won't even say necessarily pick up, because they were already very strong there. Yeah. Hold on to seats. That is where a lot of their real strength is. The question is how much will they hold on to in BC? And if BC does elect a number of Liberals, does that Western alienation, separation talk, does that go away because the party does have more of a presence, the Liberal Party have more of a presence in Western Canada, albeit BC, which is quite often looked at differently than Alberta, Saskatchewan, and especially now with a provincial NDP government. But does some of that talk then evaporate because the Liberals have more of a presence in BC than they had before?
Well, you'd have to think that Mark Carney would, at worst, have to pay attention.
Yeah, absolutely.
And rightfully so. I mean, we're a country of 10 provinces and 3 territories, and regardless of where your MPs are, regardless of where the population is, you've got to listen to everybody. And maybe where the population goes, more money goes, because there's more population and they need more things. You can accept that, but to be shut out, as some feel that they are, is certainly not the way to govern.
No.
And if the Liberals do pick up a number of seats across Western Canada, it also gives him the opportunity in forming a cabinet to have more of a Western presence in that cabinet, more of a Western voice speaking in cabinet, which then in turn theoretically should help Western causes or Western demands.
I think they could do it. I think there is the will. The question is, even when you do it, is it understood? I mean, Justin Trudeau, rightly or wrongly, rammed a pipeline across BC that a lot of people in BC did not want.
Sure.
And I don't think he got 1 inch of gratitude from the Albertans who complained it cost too much.
Yes. Yeah.
So. Again, there's a classic example of, even when somebody tries to do some, if you're the federal government, are you going to get a break? Because they have a tradition of doing that. But I do think that now is the time, and whether it's interprovincial trade, I think there's things that could be done to start shoring that up.
Sure.
They're probably always going to have a disagreement on environmental standards. And
we've been hearing that for years, that it's the one major trade gap in Canada is trade amongst ourselves. And why can't I send a case of wine to my sister in Montreal or New Brunswick
trunk of
or
your
whatever.
car.
Exactly.
And once again, that also goes back to the trade issue and tariffs with the United States. That has prompted Canada to look inward to a degree and go, yeah, we need to trade interprovincially a lot better than we do because it's been so bad up until now. We also need to look at finding other markets other than the US as well, but it has helped. And that's not a bad thing, that we do break down the interprovincial trade barriers in this country, because they have been a bone of contention for a long time amongst individual provinces not being able to trade with each other. Maybe if there is a silver lining out of the tariff issue, maybe that is one of them.
Yeah, and then it would be a huge step forward, for sure, especially to small business, because at the end of the day, small business is the backbone of any country, of any democratic country. It's a small businessman. They're the ones that hire, mom and pop and whatever.
Look at our wine industry.
Yeah.
You go to Calgary, all you can buy is California wine. So I mean, what was it? I can't remember his name now. He was Obama's chief of staff. Said a crisis is a terrible thing to waste.
Yeah.
And I think, if you've said we've talked about it a long time, but I don't think there's ever been this kind of threat.
No.
That could bring the provincial premiers to the table, because they're sacred cows. I mean, the reason we don't have it is that each one of them, Quebec wants their dairy. Right? And each one of them has their sacred cow.
Exactly.
And so, maybe in a crisis, they'll be more apt to start talking.
We have a crisis.
We have a crisis.
That we do.
We have a crisis, Prime Minister Carney. We have a crisis.
We do.
Again, we've been talking about the Donald Trump factor, and Stephen Fuhrer, who's running for the Liberals, a former MP of the former Kelowna Lake Country riding, now the Kelowna riding, had this to say on the threat Mr. Trump brings to this country.
If you start by the closest alligator to the boat, the biggest threat to our situation right now is economic instability that the states is causing to themselves, because we're still tied to them, or direct threats to our economy that are playing out right now with regards to tariffs. If we don't solve this problem, everything else that falls underneath that, all the kitchen table things, all the things that matter to us day to day, will be affected by that. It'll be infinitely harder to fix housing, to give people good, or to allow people to have good jobs. Think about anything else that we do day to day that would be easier if our economy is in big trouble. So that's the problem we need to fix right now. It's urgent. Mark Carney is uniquely qualified. He's not like the old Prime Minister. He's a completely different person with a completely different skill set.
Once again, Stephen Fuhrer, former MP for Kelowna Lake Country, hoping to be the newly elected MP for the Liberals in the newly named Kelowna riding. It's 27 minutes after 7. The polls have been closed for 27 minutes. Still waiting for our first numbers from that riding. We do have an update from the Similkameen, South Okanagan, West Kootenay. Helena Conan's the Conservative, hoping third time's a charm. She has 1,203 votes, 41.48%. She now has about 120 vote lead, 124 actually, over Gloria Morgan, the Liberal candidate, with 1,079 votes. And far behind is Linda Sankey, the NDP, hoping to hold on to that. Richard Canning's old riding, I believe he was first elected in 2015, I want to say. But decided to call it a career and hang around here. Stay home. As opposed to that commute back and forth between him and here in Ottawa. Wonder how many MPs back in Ontario are hoping a couple more Toronto-Ottawa games so they can sneak into the, now that the campaign is over, they can sneak into the arena in Ottawa and catch a game.
I have a feeling they probably don't even know.
Once again, the results are coming in slow. If you're just joining us, the major networks are calling a Liberal government, a Liberal victory. They've yet to say majority minority. You need 172 to obtain a majority. Liberals at 149 elected or leading. The Conservatives 119 elected or leading. That number will go up substantially. as we go through the prairies. 23 for the Bloc, 5 NDP, 1 Green. I would assume that's Elizabeth May.
Yep.
And her riding, PPC, Maxime Bernier sitting at 0. Maxime Bernier's had a 2-election run with the PPC, a party that he basically started. I guess he's leader as long as he wants to be. But
to be honest, I think that party is a non-factor anyway. I mean, there's a number of small fringe parties out there who every 4 years rolls around, they get their candidate to be able to stand up at an all-candidates meeting if they show up and say their piece. And I don't know if they necessarily have that much of an impact as such. I mean, obviously they have some supporters, but none in terms of numbers that really make a difference.
And I mean, again, we've talked about vote splitting. We're talking about vote splitting all the time. And there's a, I mean, even if it's 2%. At 2%.
Exactly. They'll do damage to the Conservatives before anyone. It's the right of them.
Sure. I just think that the numbers are so small. That unlike the NDP and the kind of the bleeding off of their support that really does have an impact on the Liberals, most likely, the bleeding off of the support of the People's Party really isn't going to help.
So I guess the question of the day is the Canadian Future Party, whose votes are they taking? And in 20 words or less, what do you know about the Canadian Future Party?
Until you mention them. Nothing.
Once again, it helps if they actually show up at all candidates meetings to let the voter know what they're all about.
I mentioned that only because Gary Suttard, hey, God love anybody who
runs for
will run for office. I mean,
absolutely.
You say what you want, you hear the rhetoric, and I mean, it would be nice if we could get positive, not negative all the time. But I firmly believe that everybody has the best interest of the country at heart. At least I would hope so. I'm more than willing to give politicians the benefit of the doubt. Those that are running, I mean, they put their life on hold. They put themselves out there to ridicule, to attack ads, etc. Family. It's not an easy thing to do, and God bless them for doing it.
I've worked with politicians 45 years, at every level, municipal mostly, but yeah, I mean, everybody, I could count on one hand out of the hundreds of thousands in Alberta and here that, I didn't see that they were in it for all the right. I might just totally disagree with them, but their heart was in the right place. They actually believed they were going to make a difference and make their community better.
Can we find out who those ones are that didn't? And can you explain them?
I could probably tell you I'm retired now.
Well, my hat is off to anybody who decides to throw their hat into the ring.
Absolutely.
And to actually get involved in the process, because that is, and it sounds almost Pollyanna-ish in a lot of ways, but I mean, it's one of the differences that this country has in relation to a lot of other countries in the world. We have this process. We have this process where one person gets to go in and cast their ballot who they want to see win, and the majority in fair and free elections wins. Say what you will about the Liberals, say what you will about the Conservatives, say what you will about the NDP, they will accept the result. And we will have a transition or a continuation of power, whichever one it happens to be, and the party that loses will accept that. And as we've seen in some countries where we wouldn't have expected it a number of years ago, that isn't always the case.
No.
Canada's an outlier, again.
Well,
I mean,
in some respects.
There's this trend in the world we see, right? This sort of illiberal democracies. You've seen it in Hungary, you've seen it in India, you've seen it in many places where democracy is used as a way to dismantle democracy. You see it in the United States.
Yes.
Little by little, take down the judiciary, take down the first is the media, take down which is always why I'm worried when people choose not to deal with them. But and that's my bigger fear. Like Trump will come and go, and he'll do a lot of damage. My bigger fear is the shift to this notion that a strong person could change things. So it does worry me when
and the acceptance of it that it's okay.
It's okay.
that this is how it should be.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I see a bit of that creeping into our politics here in Canada.
Absolutely.
Which is very concerning. I think should be very, very concerning. Where I mean, there is one of the comments that I hear made is a criticism of Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party, and they say, well, the man's never had a real job.
Mm-hmm.
I do believe that being a politician is a real job.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And sure, he's been doing it for a long time. That doesn't mean that he's never had a real job and he's never really worked. Agree with him or disagree with his politics, he has had a real job and he has worked.
Mm-hmm.
And he has worked pretty hard. And I think that we shouldn't write off our politicians that way and think that, if you're a politician, you're not a real worker. You don't really have a job like the rest of us have. It's a different sort of job, and it's one that, quite frankly, we need given our system of democracy.
Well,
we need those people in office.
And the part that gets me is the honest exchange of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
A conversation, whether you're, regardless of what your political stripe is, question period in the House of Commons, outside the Commons, whether it's a legislature, City Hall. Just because I disagree with you doesn't mean you're an idiot.
No.
Doesn't mean that, it doesn't make you a bad person. It's, we're taking different paths to try and get to the same end. I just believe in doing it this way, you believe in doing it that way.
Exactly.
Doesn't mean one's right or wrong. And we've seen through history, a liberal government or a left-wing government or a right-wing government takes over. We're still in the same mess. It's just a different puppet pulling the strings,
And if you look over the years too, I think that sometimes the party, in Canada, because the role of the Prime Minister is so profound. I mean, we've, once upon a time, ministers meant something, but over time they eroded that. So the Prime Minister is truly the Prime Minister.
Yes, exactly.
And that puts their stamp on the party. And I think one of the difficulties is you look back over time. Well, Paul Martin was probably more conservative than Brian Mulroney. Just Brian Mulroney happened to be running the Conservative Party, and Paul Martin's father was a federal Liberal minister, and so he became a Liberal. And so I think over time, those things shifted, and because it really depends on who the Prime Minister actually is.
Speaking of the Prime Minister, I just heard that he has been elected in Nepean. So
there's a shock.
The man who many derided for being the Prime Minister without being elected has now been
has a seat.
Yeah.
I would expect Mr. Poilievre will be re-elected in his Ottawa area riding.
Which borders the Nepean riding.
Yes, yes.
The two ridings are side by side.
Exactly.
Was that not the riding that has about 70 some odd candidates running?
90.
Most of them
91.
91. Most of them independents.
Longest ballot.
We do have our first local results. Kelowna riding. Stephen Fuhr, the former member of Parliament for the Liberal Party, with 49.55% of the vote. And it looks like it'll just be a two-horse race here. 3,199 votes. Not sure how many ballot boxes or whatever that translates to. Tracy Gray, the current Conservative member of Parliament, seeking a third term, 47.01%, 3,035 votes. So that's what 170 vote difference. Trevor McAleese, the NDP candidate, with 176. So it's as expected, it's Fuhr versus Gray, and I would suspect that's going to be fairly tight all night. Still waiting for our first results from Okanagan Lake West, South Kelowna, and basically Scott Anderson up in Vernon Lake Country, Monashee, 2-to-1 advantage, better than a 2-to-1 advantage, or no, basically 2-to-1 advantage over Blair Vischer, the Green Party candidate. Which is an interesting
I noticed
scenario. I'm wondering.
I noticed that earlier on, and I thought to myself, I don't know if the numbers are coming in very slowly or if it's right. But the fact that the Liberal candidate, Anna Warwick-Sears, is so far back of the Conservative, and in fact so far back of both the Green and the NDP candidate there.
I just wonder if there is...
I'd be interested to know how many polls are reporting at this point.
And whether there's a glitch somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does.
In sending out those numbers, because that's... You would think that Anna Warwick-Sears and Blair Vischer's numbers would be switched.
But even if even closer, the fact that they're not even in the ballpark.
I mean, and even in a heavily conservative riding, that does seem like
this election
such a bizarrely wide margin there.
Mel Arnold, we have our first numbers in from Kamloops Shuswap Central Rockies. Very, very preliminary, 71 votes to 52 for Ken Roberts and the Liberal candidate who ran the last election in the South Okanagan riding against Richard Cannings. So that's very early. That's probably one ballot box. Kamloops Thompson Nicola, again very early. Frank Caputo, the incumbent Conservative, 63 votes. Miguel Goudreau, the NDP, 31, and Ian Curry, the Liberal, 27 votes. Again, very, very early. And that's about it. We're still waiting for, as mentioned, Okanagan Lake West, South Kelowna, and also waiting for Columbia, Kootenay, Southern Rockies, waiting for some of those numbers to come in. But
it'd be interesting in BC. I mean, you got the island, which is such a NDP stronghold, and will they hold on just because it's the island?
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Regardless of what happens in the rest of the world.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, and Jagmeet Singh in his home riding of what used to be Burnaby South, which was the riding I grew up in. Is he safe?
Yeah.
I mean, he's in jeopardy of being unseated.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunately a death knell for any party.
Or Abbotsford. I mean, Abbotsford will be an interesting one where
DeYoung is running as an
independent.
And in a lot of ways, he's running as an independent, but he might as well be running as a Conservative.
Yeah.
And I have my own thought on this, is that if he wins, which going into this he looked like he stood a good chance of being able to do, would he eventually just join the Conservatives because he wanted to run for them?
Yeah.
They said no. Is he going to just maintain sitting as an independent, or will he join the Conservative caucus, or at least vote with the Conservative caucus?
He's probably more well known than the Conservative candidate that he's running against.
He is.
So we'll see if the Liberals splits the. That was the thing that came up today. Well, will they start breaking even where Conservatives are voting Conservative anyways? And so that's a very interesting race to watch in BC.
One of the safe ridings for the Conservatives is up in Kamloops Thompson Nicola. Frank Caputo is the incumbent MP, and at a recent all-candidates meeting, Frank Caputo talked about crime in Kamloops and his concerns.
Or by law every single week. That's their community impact statements. Crime is up 50%. Violent crime is up 50%. Shootings, gun crimes up 116%. We don't need people to say, I'm impacted. They are impacted. They're telling us that they are impacted. As Conservatives, we'll deal with these things. Rather than free drugs, you're going to get free treatment. The police unions, they've come out and they've endorsed our plan because they know it's the best plan. We will get to this and we will do it right. And we'll not only tackle the root causes, we'll tackle the end causes specifically.
Okay, Frank Caputo, the Conservative Member of Parliament, the incumbent in the Kamloops Thompson Nicola riding, and he is leading. Again, we're very early. We're only about 45 minutes into vote counting right now, but we do have some new results that have come in. So just to give you an idea, they are counting in your riding. Columbia Kootenay Southern Rockies with about 40 votes counted. Rob Morrison, the incumbent Conservative, with 19 votes. Reggie Goldsberry, the Liberal, has 7. Again, that's very early. Frank Caputo, 235 to 142 for Ian Curry, the Liberal, that in Kamloops Thompson Nicola. Mel Arnold in Kamloops Shuswap Central Rockies, 92 to 72. That's over Ken Robertson, the Liberal. Most of these, and you're going to hear Conservative leading, Liberal second. That's what we expect for most of the ridings, save for Kelowna, which is should be neck and neck throughout most of the night. Similkameen, South Okanagan, West Kootenay, Helena Conans, 2297. Gloria Morgan of the Liberals, 2104. In Vernon, it is Conservative Scott Anderson, 1523. Anna Warwick Sears, the Liberal, 772. So that's been corrected. Okanagan Lake West, South Kelowna, our first numbers, again, very preliminary, 75 for Juliette Seacott. The Liberal candidate, 63 for Conservative Dan Albus. And Kelowna riding, it's Stephen Fuhr, 3913, the Liberal, former Liberal MP. Tracy Gray, 3757, the Conservative candidate. There's 49% to 47%. He's mentioned it's going to be, I'm sure that's going to be tight all night long.
Yeah, sure.
And I mean, we saw last week, first of all, we had the battle of the former premiers with Christy Clark backing Stephen Fuhr, and then Gordon Campbell coming out in favor of Tracy Gray. Then we had the battle of the former Prime Minister. Jean Chrétien came out in favor of Stephen Fuhr, and Stephen Harper. Of course, of course they're going to back those candidates.
Indeed.
Point me in the right direction, I'll say what you want.
Yeah.
But it just tells you how, I don't want to say scared each candidate is, but how tight they expect the race to be, and they're looking for any edge they can get.
They are, and it's interesting. We conducted a poll, and it's not scientific. It's whoever chooses to respond. But given that it can be that subjective, asking if people were influenced by endorsements when a political candidate gets an endorsement by a former politician or a famous person or whatever, and quite overwhelmingly the answer was no. That it didn't sway their vote one way or the other if somebody was endorsed by a former well-known politician.
It's a chest thumper. Look who I got, look who you got. Mine's better than yours.
It's a bit like lawn signs. Every time years and years and years ago, I worked on a campaign. I was like a student, and I remember the candidates say, "Do not put a sign in front of a vacant lot or a boulevard because they don't vote." It was quite adamant that these had to be. And I drive around, of course, signs are everywhere. Every time I drive by, I think of that. And if you look this time around, maybe it was the timing. It was a very short campaign. There really weren't a lot of lawn signs.
No.
I walked through my whole neighborhood and see like two.
I was very surprised how overall few signs that I saw. And also in elections past, whether it be provincial, federal, or even to a degree municipal, but not as much there, you would get crops of the same sign, where there would be 10 or 12 of the same sign, like one after the other. Yeah. So when you're driving along, it's like you were seeing it and seeing it and seeing it. Yeah. And I wasn't seeing that. This time. But I think some of that also speaks to, and it's a question that I have about for the major parties. Everybody knew this election was coming, and they knew it was coming sooner rather than the fixed date of October. Yeah. I was quite surprised at how seemingly unprepared the major parties were in terms of having candidates ready.
Well, especially the Liberals, because they controlled the narrative.
Indeed, when the writ was dropped, I believe the Conservatives had 245 candidates nominated. The NDP and the Liberals both were in and around the 150 mark. Yep. And you're talking about a 5-week campaign, and you've still got nearly half your candidates to find if you're the case of the Liberals or the NDP, and then all of a sudden candidates are just being named, rather than going through any kind of process to win the nomination. And that ruffled some people the wrong way.
Well, you remember, we, and I won't go into names here, but one of the political candidates that, we interviewed on our one-on-one was chatting with Al and I and asked if we would sign, be one of the 100 signatories.
Yeah.
They were still looking for, and they're already on the website. They've got, or I'm not sure if there were signs, but they were certainly out there doing interviews and stuff, but still trying to get those 100 signatures to allow them to actually be in the race.
Yeah.
And it's cart before the horse, but you would think that that would have been done before the, as soon as somebody said, yes, I'm going to run, boom.
Given that the Liberals had a much better idea, but even
they controlled the narrative.
But even the Conservatives knew, and so did the NDP and everybody else, an election wasn't going to wait until October. It was going to be coming sooner. So why weren't parties better prepared?
I think the Carney factor. I mean, they knew the date, but I mean, there wasn't a lot of time between him winning, becoming the Prime Minister, and calling. And 10
days, I believe.
And quite frankly, I mean, we'd be talking about this would be completely the opposite way if Justin Trudeau was still running.
Oh, yeah.
So I think a lot of people made their decision to run based on the fact that I'll hitch my wagon to Carney.
If Trudeau was still leading the Liberals and was still the Prime Minister, I strongly believe that 20-point lead that the Conservatives had
wouldn't hold. Yeah.
It not only would have hold, it would have been bigger heading into the election, because there was so many people that, for their own reasons, whatever those happened to be, Trudeau's time was up.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because of the injection of Trump and what he has done into this election. Trudeau's time was up, but not necessarily the Liberal government. Yeah. And I think the Conservatives tried very hard during the election campaign to tie everybody under Carney to the former government, saying, they've just rearranged the deck chairs. It hasn't really changed anything. Sure, the Prime Minister is different, but he's still surrounded by all the same people that we didn't like the last time.
Isn't it interesting? And I know political, provincial politics, federal politics, whatever name you use, they're not always the same, even if they have the same name.
Exactly.
But how the Conservatives in BC 6 months ago were the authors, or were given a huge bone when the BC United polled,
collapsed,
and even before that,
when
all of a sudden they became the party of choice, riding partially on the coattails of Pierre Poilievre. Now, it seems to be the other way around, where through some of their own missteps, through having their wagon, rightly or wrongly, hitched to Donald Trump, partly because of the style of campaign they ran, and some of the rhetoric was very similar, if not the same, and also having a very unpopular Prime Minister step down for somebody who has some cachet. Is seen as an economic guru by some. Maybe he's the one that can pull us by our bootstraps out of the malaise that we're in economically, and but it's just interesting, the parallels. One takes it just scoots forward, the other one slides back.
An interesting development here: CTV is now declaring a Liberal minority. That's going to be very interesting, because who is going to be holding the balance of power? The Bloc Québécois.
Exactly.
And how is that going to work, given that the Bloc makes no bones about it? If it's good for Quebec, they support it, and if it's not good for Quebec, they don't support it. And you have a party with the majority of seats who needs to govern an entire country.
Well then, I would suggest
it's one thing having the NDP holding the Bloc.
Of course.
Well, it's different having the Bloc.
And those Quebec issues, rightly or wrongly. The focus then, the spotlight on our 7 ridings becomes even more.
Absolutely.
Who can gain? Who can pick up? Can the Conservatives steal one from the NDP as Richard Canning's leave? Can the Liberals flip the Kelowna riding? Can somebody else provide an upset? Well, let's just look at some numbers. And federally, The last we've heard, 158, 134, leading or elected. Again, it's 172 that's required. Throughout the central Okanagan, the southern interior, Stephen Fuhr just over 50%, 50.61, Tracy Gray 45.36. That works out to 5,681 to 5,092. So that's almost a 600 vote lead for Stephen Fuhr, and it's just getting a little larger. Juliet Seacott, and again, this one is very early. 183 votes to 161 over Dan Albus. It's a 20 vote spread. Thank you very much. I just got a timeout. Unfortunately. But the other one of interest was the South Okanagan. Before my screen went blank, and you can probably see it there as you pull it up. Helena Conans is now in second place.
That one seems
she is
to be
now
going
trailing Gloria Morgan by 328 votes, 2950 to 2622. If you have the same numbers I do.
Yeah, I've got 2912 to 2598.
Okay.
So, but that one does seem to be one that is going back and forth and back and forth.
Yeah, it switches every time.
All night. That one's been moving in flipping back and forth. But like you say, the Okanagan, Lake West, South Kelowna is very early. The numbers are still pretty small.
Yeah.
And that would be, and to be honest, that would be a major upset if the Liberal Juliet Seacott was able to defeat Dan Albus, the Conservative.
No question.
Because I don't think anybody would have seen that one coming.
No, Liberals have never
not
come
my
close.
No.
Yeah, never come close to that, right?
I mean, you can argue that the South Okanagan, I mean, it was NDP if they have enough support, and again, that, the NDP to the Liberals, and, this time only, you could argue that maybe that wouldn't be a surprise necessarily, but sure, Okanagan West, Okanagan Lake West, South Kelowna, that would be a shock.
And it is extremely early at this point. The numbers are very small. I mean, the percentage looks large, but the numbers are very small. 183 votes to 161 votes. I can't see that necessarily holding up for too long.
No.
Minority government, like it, hate it.
I worry about the Bloc holding the balance of power.
Okay.
I mean, I think sometimes a minority government can help. It's going to draw people together. But I worry about, truly now worry about Western alienization, with the Bloc being, as Al said, so single focused.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll need a little more of those NDP votes to come through in BC to give them the ability to survive.
And who knows? Because of course, obviously, with BC being the last place where the polls close, if the Liberals do pick up some more seats, defeating Conservative candidates or even NDP candidates, because there are NDP incumbents in this province. Will BC finally play a major role in a federal election in terms of pushing them over that 172 seat line that they need? That remains to be seen. But at this point, I think that I don't particularly like minority governments anyway. But at this time, given what the country is facing, I think a minority government on either side, I don't think is necessarily ideal for what the federal government is going to have to deal with in terms of external threats as much as internal political threats to that particular
It's going to be
government.
interesting, too, to see how close the Liberals get to a majority. Because if they get close enough that any NDP support would be enough to put them over, then they might not necessarily need the Bloc.
Right.
But if it's still tight, conservative liberal, we could see a situation that we saw in our province several years ago, where it's not the party that got the most seats or the most votes that was able to form government. It was the NDP when Christy Clark couldn't get the support of the Green Party. Who would the Bloc support? Would they support, and if they hold the balance of power either way, Would
I
they
mean,
support Poilievre, or would they
I mean,
support
I do
Carney?
think politically, with the exception of the separation issue, they are more closely aligned in terms of their policies to liberal policies than they are to conservative policies. And of course, we did see federally with the NDP, when they did support the Liberals under Justin Trudeau, there weren't particularly big numbers, but there were enough to keep the Liberals in power and to be able to govern for the most part like they wanted to. They obviously had to capitulate to certain NDP demands, which they did, and programs were brought in. Now the question is, what would the demands of a Bloc Québécois kingmaker be? And how does that impact the rest of the country?
It's as you said, this would be a time to have a majority government, and if Canada, the people of Canada said, well, it's not on the cards, well, we'll see. Although, like you say, the NDP, a few more votes in the NDP would put them over the line. Yeah, I worry, but the focus, I think, is going to be the impact of tariffs, the impact. So. And their platforms are, generally the same. So it's not like there was wild swings in things that the federal government's actually going to do. But it certainly is, I think, would be unhelpful if you end up with. I guess it'll be a big test for the Conservatives. Can they pull together and try to make things work if they're, hold power, or they try to get power? That'll be the big question. And will they cooperate?
And the other issue that I have with this is you have both the Bloc and the NDP both saying at the end of this previous parliament that they wanted the Liberals out of power and that they would vote against them if it came down to a question of a confidence question. So if the Liberals do win and they are returned in a minority situation, how much of that we didn't want the Liberals to form the next government is there still amongst the NDP and the Bloc, based on what they said at the end of the last parliament? And I kind of wonder about that, well, so are they going to throw their support behind the Liberals, or are they going to say, we had 10 years of Liberal government,
let's give the other guy a shot.
Give the Conservatives a shot and play kingmaker for them.
I don't know enough about the Bloc, but I would say I agree with you. Generally, they're going to align with the Liberals. Generally, the NDP, I think, naturally aligns with the Liberals. So, I don't think the NDP are going to game, because they could be really punished if they did that. Could you imagine as an opposition, if the NDP in a crisis brought down the government? I mean, there could actually be implications of that move. So I think, which is probably why,
and of course they also fear losing some of the programs that they convinced the Liberals to do.
Universal dental
care, pharmacare. Those programs are ones that they campaigned on saying,
look at us.
Look at what we got done, and if you vote in a Conservative government, they're going to get rid of it. That was their campaign pitch.
Do you think, we saw gas prices come down when the carbon tax was taken off. This morning I woke up and gas prices were down even further to 139 or 131. Does that have any bearing, do you think? I mean, I know the one straw poll for a voter is my life better now than it was when you took power? And I think most people say no. We went through COVID and whatever. But do you think small things like that make a difference? Or, I mean, I know it's election day, but let's bring that back 2 weeks earlier. Does that stuff resonate or no?
I think the food side does, and again, I think we're still in the aftermath of COVID. I mean, COVID's had a profound influence on our culture and our way of thinking, and we're still sorting out. I mean, the price of food and the supply chains are being disrupted really caused a huge problem. And I know they like to blame it on Justin Trudeau. I guess he caused it in the States and Europe too, right? He's not a terrible guy. He had those influence. So, but I still think those things are still sorting out. I question a little bit why, you know, grocery stores charge what they charge when the supply lines are all back. Somehow the prices never came back down, but I guess we'll leave that. So, yeah, I think those things do start resonating. Do people blame the government of the day? Yeah, I think some people do.
Well, and I think that there's no doubt about it that cost of living and cost of goods was a major issue in this election. The impact of tariffs and what that would do to cost of living as well as employment jobs, I think was also, but once again, they kind of tied somewhat together. And it's easy, like, to blame the government for that, but I think that when you talk about, you know, do the little things, I mean, in BC, obviously, we had a BC carbon tax. So when Pierre Poilievre got up on the stump and said, you know, axe the tax, get rid of the carbon tax, he was talking about the federal carbon tax, which BC didn't have to get rid of the BC carbon tax. They decided it's politically palatable to do if you're getting rid of the federal one, that we get rid of ours too. So in terms of, like, you know, little things like gas prices being cheaper, I think that just plays into the bigger picture of cost of living. Everything's getting so expensive for us. That's one more thing that's come down. That's a good thing that it came down.
You know, I've always looked at politics the same as I look at, say, football. The quarterback gets probably more credit than he deserves when they win, and more blame than he deserves when they lose. And I think at the end of the day, you know, does the government and does the Prime Minister have some influence on inflation? Some, but there are worldwide pressures that, you know, trump, pardon that phrase, everything else. And, you know, so, and I think at the end of the day, a Prime Minister will take more heat for things that go wrong than he should, and more credit when things go right than he should.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about it. In Canada, the Prime Minister of Canada within his country has an inordinate amount of power.
Yes.
In some ways, more power than the President of the United States has in the U.S.
Unless the Republicans are in.
Yeah, well, but enable.
We don't have a Congress or a Senate.
Exactly.
Same kind of Senate.
Exactly, and of what he can do, of the people he can appoint, of the policies that he can have brought in. So when it comes to, you know, blaming someone, yeah, they do get a lot of the blame, but they also have a lot of the power to be able to do this stuff too.
Sure,
and
of course,
and from that point of view, I kind of go, you know what you're signing up for when you become the Prime Minister, or you become the leader of your party, hoping to be Prime Minister one day, that the buck is going to stop inches from your head, let alone on your desk. You know.
But I think it goes back to, you know, we've lost the ability to understand. You know, we're the civics classes. I don't know, maybe they're doing it anymore, but I agree. I mean, there is, you can shape and you can nudge things. But at the end of the day, there are world events like COVID. It just takes over. Now you're only judged if you did a better job than the UK or the United States, right? And we're always looking at those things. But, you know, even within local government, you know, one of the things that I think people are often surprised is, you know, when you look at the city, like, so much of the work you do is legislated. Your span of control, even as a city manager, your span of control is just a very minute amount. As council, you do the budget, but there's still things you have to do. You have to plow roads. You have to. So
except provincial roads, but you still get
paid for it.
They still blame you for it.
Yeah, but it's you know, I think to start understanding, you know, some of that there's yes, you can. I think you can nudge it. But I'm not sure you control it, right? You can, and maybe you nudge it in the wrong way at the wrong time, and then it makes it worse. But I think there's not as much leeway, and so that's why whether it's a municipal election, provincial or federal, some of the promises are like, no, it's not going to happen.
And the one area where you're uniquely qualified to answer this question. So we're in a situation we could potentially have MPs from the opposition party. We could potentially have MPs from the ruling party. Obviously, it's more beneficial for a city, especially if you're looking to get, you know, funding, grants, etc., for the government to have a governing MP. But you also have to work with opposition MPs and maybe and get creative as to how you work with them to try and get the government's attention.
Yeah, well, it's kind of an interesting balancing act because sometimes you actually have to determine how you're going to approach that, right? Because if your MP, and I'm not speaking for Kelowna because we've never had this situation, but if your MP is a thorn in the side of the government, you sometimes don't run to that MP or MLA, depending on the case, and you kind of do it yourself. So I think obviously having a member, an elected member of the government that you can go to is always helpful.
Yeah. Right. Got more numbers coming in, and it's looking more and more, and I don't want to go out too far on a limb here, but it's looking more and more like Stephen Fuhr may reclaim the Kelowna riding for the Liberal Party. 49.7% of the vote. He's stretched his lead over Tracy Gray to about 800, a little more than 800 votes, 8,583 to 7,727. That's a large chunk of votes that have been counted in the Kelowna riding. So Stephen Fuhr has been stretching slowly, but incrementally that lead throughout the evening. And unless that turns, it looks like Stephen Fuhr may be headed back to Ottawa. Jeanette Seacott, keep that name in mind. She continues to lead, and it's still early, but she continues to lead Dan Elbus by 71 votes, 47.81% to 41.03, but it's only 501 votes to 430. So it's still very early there. Scott Anderson with a 600 and change lead in Vernon Lake Country Monashee. He the Conservative city councillor in Vernon, leading Anna Warwick Sears, the Liberal, who incidentally, and you talk about the comparison between NDP and Liberal, she ran for the NDP in the provincial election. In Kamloops, Shuswap, Central Rockies, we do expect Mel Arnold to easily be re-elected there, or to be elected there. He's the current MP in Vernon, but now running in the Kamloops, Shuswap, Central Rockies. 629 votes, that's 57% to 29% for Ken Robertson, the Liberal. Kamloops, Thompson, Nicola, again expecting Frank Caputo to win re-election there for the Conservatives, and he has a healthy lead over Ian Curry. And the same scenario in Columbia, Kootenay, Southern Rockies. Rob Morrison, the popular member of Parliament for the Conservatives, a little more than 60% of the votes. Again, it's early, 539, but he's more than doubled that of Reggie Goldsberry, the Liberal, who has 25.14% of the vote. So, and I glossed over Similkameen, South Okanagan, West Kootenay. That's flipped again. Helena Conans leading marginally over Gloria Morgan, the Liberal, 5,866 to 5,778. That one looks like it's going to go right down to the wire.
And talking about going down to the wire, looking at the federal overall picture, the latest that I'm seeing here is Liberals 156, either elected or leading, Conservatives 148. The Bloc Québécois 26, the NDP 11, and the Greens 1. This may be, from a national point of view, a lot closer than some of the people were thinking heading into tonight, because those kind of numbers, even if the Liberals were to get the NDP, if the NDP held at the 11 that they're at now, that's not majority.
The Bloc
territory.
The Bloc could prop up either one.
The Bloc would be the kingmaker.
And they could prop either one up.
Yeah, now, and that's with 342 of 343 seats reporting at this point.
Certainly the Bloc, their strength obviously didn't collapse as much as they were thinking. That's the real issue.
I mean, obviously did go down somewhat from 33 seats at dissolution to leading or elected in 25, but it may be enough for the Bloc to have if you can call it when you lose seats a good night, a good night.
Well, if you look at the percentage too, between in terms of the percentage of the popular vote, it's pretty much where the pollsters have been hovering, right? The numbers are pretty much in that range.
Yeah.
Well, I know early on in Atlantic Canada, for instance, early on the Conservatives had a lead in the popular vote, but many of the pundits said they needed at least 5 seats to be competitive, to kick things off, being competitive. They had 8 the last time, so lose 3, but you're still competitive. And I believe they ended up with 8 or 9.
Yes.
So it was certainly a good start for Pierre Poilievre. And I mean, the unfortunate part with polls, and like you look at Canada 338 as an example. They don't do their own polling. They just kind of
they're an aggregator.
Yeah, they look at everything
company.
else. Yeah. And I mean, have we had polls for the Kelowna riding? Or West Kelowna riding? I don't know.
Well, you also have to keep in mind that we don't have one election. In
of course,
we have 343 elections
exactly.
in Canada. Yeah. So when the pollsters go out and they say, this is the percentage who are supporting the Conservatives across the country, and this is the percentage who's supporting the Liberals across the country, that doesn't necessarily take into account individual ridings.
Of course.
So you could have a party, and this is what appeared was going to be the case with the Conservatives, and maybe it's not quite playing out like they thought, but it appeared that, sure, they had lots of support, but it was in certain pockets, and those pockets weren't thought that they were going to be enough to win them enough seats.
Wouldn't translate into seats.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Now, looking at these kind of numbers, maybe that was not quite, I wouldn't go so far as to say polls are wrong, but maybe that wasn't quite as much of a slam dunk of a Liberal majority that was being thought of leading into it.
It would be interesting to see the breakdown in Ontario, because that's where they really, and if the Bloc did well in Quebec, some of those things didn't play out.
Which kind of goes to that, win Ontario, win the election, win Quebec, you get a majority or minority. And because it may very well be that Quebec dictates minority or majority.
Yeah, no, that's for sure.
It will be interesting to see. You already mentioned that Mark Carney was elected for the first time to Parliament. So congratulations to our, I hesitate to say next Prime Minister, because if these results hold steady and the Bloc play politics,
it's
hard to say.
And the question obviously becomes, it's one thing on election night to be declared by the media a Liberal minority. It's quite another then to command the confidence of the House of Commons when you get in there to actually form the government.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, the numbers I'm seeing now, Liberals 155 leading or elected, Conservatives 152 leading or elected.
Yeah, it's neck and neck.
It is neck and neck between the two of them. I don't really see the Bloc or the NDP moving much off their numbers of 25 and 10 respectively, but the Liberals are definitely, they're in a race with the Conservatives at this point that I think was probably closer than a lot of people thought was going to be, and some did think it was going to be a close race.
I was trying to find, there's Burnaby Millardville. Trying to find the Burnaby riding where Jagmeet Singh is running, and he is running third in the what's newly called Burnaby Central.
Oh my goodness!
Now it's early, 288 votes. I mean, 8 out of 200 polls reporting, but he's running third behind the Liberal and Conservative candidates. PPC candidate there is a non-factor, as one would expect. But if this shakes down the way it looks like it's going to shake down, it's going to be an interesting, as you say, it's going to be an interesting next 4 days, 5 days. Who makes the call to Donald Trump? Who takes the phone call?
I don't know if the call actually gets made yet, to be honest. I think until they iron out who's speaking on behalf of Canada, I don't know if that call gets made. I mean, there may be the perfunctory congratulations, but I don't know if any kind of substantial call about what happens with or without tariffs, I don't think it gets made.
I'm just looking at the BC map right now, and the Kelowna riding is very conspicuous as a red dot in a sea of blue.
Yeah.
Well, the interesting thing is the little tiny part that sticks out is Kelowna,
It's Kelowna.
and the rest is Beaverdale and Bears.
Yeah.
Beaverdale, Bears, and a few cabins.
And a few cabins.
Yeah, that little river. What do you call that Highway 33 sliver? It's almost like Gracie's finger from
Panama Canal.
Yeah, just
yeah.
about.
I use the Beaverdale finger, but
that's highly unusual. But right now, Stephen Fuhr with 12,900, Tracy Gray with 11,587. So that's 1,300 and change. It has not been declared yet. 154, 151.
Yes.
Yeah. Did you have that on your bingo card? No?
I wouldn't have had it that close. I thought it would be close, but I wouldn't have thought that close.
The number that surprises me is NDP 11.
They have come back. There's no doubt about it from where they were. I mean, at one point they were, I think, leading or elected in 2 seats. I think so. They've definitely. But I mean, once again, it's half the number of seats they had at dissolution. And the Bloc Québécois had 33 at dissolution and now have 25. So both of them have dropped.
But they've held on.
But they have held on. They have held on, and they've held on in what could very well be a substantive way.
Yeah.
Albeit by small numbers.
I would like to know where the one riding is that has yet to report any numbers.
Look at the size of the country. It could just be but it's probably not somewhere in the north. It's probably some Toronto riding.
Yeah.
Or something.
Yeah. Or some BC riding somewhere.
BC riding,
So, just looking, the Communist Party leader was defeated in their riding.
Who would have thought?
Yeah.
Maxime Bernier was defeated in Beauce. Bloc, obviously. Blanchette was re-elected. Pierre Poilievre is trailing.
I know.
Yeah,
I saw that earlier. That he was trailing, and there were news stories heading into the election day, like last week, where it talked about there was a chance that he could lose in his riding. Now, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily helped by the fact that there's 90 people on the ballot in his riding. That you definitely talk about splitting the vote, but.
And what about
splitting the vote in crazy small ways?
Well, what about splitting the party? Because we've got 2 Green leaders, one's leading and one's trailing.
I think one of the things that, again, I heard as you listen to the different broadcasts and different analysis is that, one of the problems with Ottawa is that, if you see what's happening in the United States, if you're going to cut the bureaucracy, those may be your constituents in Ottawa. I mean, if you're in Calgary and you're going to cut the bureaucracy, or Winnipeg, that might play. In Ottawa, it might put added pressure on you. Right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you
certainly didn't show up at any all candidates meetings and probably didn't answer the media questionnaires.
I mean, you talk about a company town.
Yeah.
Ottawa is a company town. The company happens to be
the government,
but it's still a company town.
It's 8 of 266 polls reporting.
Yeah.
But Poilievre he's 1,400 votes down.
Yeah.
4,000 to 2,600.
Yeah.
59% to 38. I mean, we're not talking about a 5-vote margin here.
No.
We're talking about a fairly healthy deficit. And I mean, certainly doing better than the Communist Party leader did in their race. But it's interesting.
That will be rather interesting.
One of the things that I did want to talk about a little bit, and that is the campaign and the campaigns of how they've been done, and to kind of get your take, Ron, on your thought about how, especially the Liberal campaign with Carney, the Conservative campaign with Poilievre, how you felt that they were run, because in a lot of ways they were quite different. The campaigns that they ran, some definite different focuses that they focused on, and at times a lack or a decision to pivot from how they had been going. And I was just going to kind of get your take on what you thought about how they ran them.
Well, I have an obvious bias, but trying to sit back. I mean, as a civil servant for 45 years, you have to work with everyone, right? So you tend to look at politics closely, but from the outside. And I think two things. One is I think the Liberals ran a very standard federal campaign. I think Poilievre ran a very Republican playbook kind of campaign. I think the reason he's in the running, talk about Donald Trump, is the ghost of Justin Trudeau. I think a lot of people, in spite of sometimes him running, which I think some Canadians didn't like, but the ghost of Justin Trudeau was even bigger. And so people said, you know what, I don't even know who Pierre Poilievre is, I'm not voting for the
and there's no doubt about it, he did bring Trudeau back into the conversation time and time again, even though Trudeau wasn't in the race.
No, but I think when you start looking at these numbers, I think that was working for him, because a lot of the people who voted said, look, I just can't bring myself to vote for the Liberal. I don't care. I don't care. Where I think Carney ran a standard type of election campaign, and I think he relied on Trump more than ever.
I was going to say, I mean, I think that Carney definitely played into the feeling that was being shown in polls that he was the best guy. Once again, we were talking earlier, to deal with Trump now, whatever that particularly meant, and as a result, Carney tended to talk about Trump. Poilievre tended to talk about Trudeau.
Yes.
As opposed to them talking about each other as the leader of their opposing party.
And the one advantage Mark Carney had too was when Trump brought the tariffs out and hit Canada hard before backing off, Mark Carney had the opportunity to suspend his campaign for a day and address the nation.
And look look prime ministerial.
Well, he did it 3 times.
Exactly. And the last time was this weekend with the tragedy in Vancouver. And so he had that opportunity. And I guess if you support the Liberals, you thought he did great. If you support the Conservatives, you thought he did terrible. If you're neither nor, whatever your opinion is. But I thought he, given the circumstances and given the fact that you didn't have a lot of lead time, and you're asking somebody to write you a speech who's just written you stump speeches, and now they've got to go 360. I thought it came across very well.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that to me the Conservative Party has to look very closely at is when you look at the Abacus polls in terms of likability, Pierre Poilievre is not a particularly likable person across those.
No.
Carney kind of stayed on his level. He wasn't liked or not liked. And I think at the end of the day, I mean, good on him, but I think his gravitas, I think his seriousness, it was kind of, okay, this is kind of anti-Trump even in his rhetoric, because he's calm, and I think those things played in. But again, I think what's bringing these numbers for the Conservatives is a lot of the fact that Justin Trudeau was still there in the background.
The ghost out.
Yeah.
Which does bring me to another issue, and that is, and I know it's early and nothing's been settled out here, but the Conservatives traditionally have been very quick to dispatch with their leaders if their leader doesn't win them an election.
Yeah.
Most recently, we have the case of Andrew Scheer, we have the case of O'Toole. There was talk that, if after having such a big lead, seeing that lead go in the polls. Poilievre couldn't pull this one out. The knives may be out for him. If he can hold the Liberals to a minority, do you think he survives as leader?
I don't know. I mean, his riding will be interesting. You know, I think the real factor here is what you're seeing in the Conservative Party is an East-West fight. I mean, you know, Doug Ford has done nothing to help him.
Nothing.
You know,
Nothing.
And Danielle Smith hasn't done much to help him, but I don't think she meant to. You know, so I think, you know, there is going to be the real struggle. I mean, you know, I think the numbers are the numbers. If this goes according to, he's going to hold him to a minority. Given what was happening in the last month, I mean, that's kind of a victory.
I was going to say,
you know, let's face it.
Yeah.
I don't think the Liberals are cheering tonight at these numbers, but. Yeah, I would think he's been worried, and I think he is worried, and I think, you know, there seems to be that push. We saw it, like, you know, even Harper's former people sticking the knife in, talking about how bad the campaign. He didn't pivot. He didn't change.
Well, campaign malpractice.
It was kept. So I think, you know what, I don't think he's out of the woods regardless.
No. And the other thing, as you pointed out, with both the case of Ford and Danielle Smith in Alberta, is he doesn't have a lot of political friends after this campaign. No. That even if he pulls it out, what's the relationship going to be like with a Doug Ford in Ontario, for instance? I can't necessarily seeing them kissing and making up anytime soon if that was the case, because like you say, Ford did him no favors at all during this campaign.
And also Ford has the biggest problem.
Yeah.
Ford has the biggest problem. Ford has people being laid off today.
Exactly. Yeah.
From these major industries,
yeah.
right?
The trades that are being hit hardest by the tariffs are in his backyard.
Yeah.
We have our first official results from BC, from our province, in our area. CTV is declaring Frank Caputo re-elected in Kamloops Thompson Nicola for the Conservative Party, with 80 out of 272 polls reporting Frank Caputo with 54.8% of the vote. That's 6,403 compared to Ian Curry, 35.6%, 4,159. So 2,250 vote lead. So that's enough for CTV to say that Frank Caputo has been elected. In our personal backyard in Kelowna, Stephen Fuhr appears headed towards victory, nothing official. 51 out of 203 polls reporting 50.3% to 44.8% for incumbent Conservative Tracy Gray. Down in the South Okanagan, the Similkameen, South Okanagan, West Kootenay, Helena Conan's now with a 600 vote lead with 105 of 281 polls reporting. That's 41.5% to 39%, so she's starting to stretch that lead. Dan Albus now has a 170 vote lead over Juliette Seacott, the Liberal challenger. Albus, of course, the incumbent, with 49.9% to 43.7% in what is truly just a two-person race. In Vernon Lake Country, Monashee, Scott Anderson appears headed towards victory. 25 polls reporting 50. Whoa, lost that one for a second. 53.7% of the vote compared to 38.7% for Liberal Anna Warwick Sears. In the Columbia Kootenay South Rockies, incumbent Ian Morrison, a Conservative, 75 out of 310 polls reporting 52.6% compared to 26% for Reggie Goldsberry, the Liberal candidate. And further north, can we get there? We can. In Kamloops Shuswap Central Rockies, Mel Arnold, who is an incumbent for Vernon Monashee, but is running in the Kamloops Shuswap Central Rockies, 55.9%, 32.9% for Ken Robertson, who is the Liberal. So things shaking out basically the way we expected to 2 hours ago when we came on the air and 90 minutes ago when the polls closed, that it looks as if the trends now continue, that the Conservatives will win 6 of the 7 ridings in our neck of the woods, in our coverage area, with the exception being the toss-up we figured was the Kelowna riding that now appears as if it's going to go in the Liberal column as a Liberal steal. But the way you expected?
I thought Kelowna was. I wouldn't call it. I think it was going to be a tough riding to call. In fact, that Stephen had won before means that theoretically he could do it again. Right? So you knew it was going to be close.
Are you surprised that the gap is what it is? That he appears to be on his way to a healthy-ish victory?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I think given the fact this is staunch, so-called conservative, small C conservative area. But again, the real question, and we may never have the answer, but I think when you look at it, he really had to pull in NDP and progressive conservatives that were maybe a little uncomfortable with either the style or some of the policies of
and you look at the NDP vote in that riding. I mean, traditionally here, the NDP tend to get around 20% of the
20%,
vote, give or take, and that's always pretty stable size of the vote. They don't tend to get a whole lot more. They don't tend to get a whole lot less.
Right.
Roughly in and around that. They're currently running at 4.1% of the vote.
Yeah.
So obviously the bleed off from the NDP has obviously gone to the Liberals, and that's what's helping propel him at this point. Now, obviously, we are talking 51 polls out of 203 reporting. So I mean, there's a lot more. There's a lot more votes to be counted at this point, and I still think that's going to be a close riding, one way or the other, no matter who wins it.
It'll be interesting to see when you look at it, because one of the things about Kelowna is the majority. I'm assuming the majority of the polls, the majority of the vote is actually in right here, and it's pretty tight. And if you think about that stretch, it's not as if you're crossing a lot of socioeconomic. I mean, it's kind of the same, right? I mean, you obviously get more density, but that density may not be, maybe absentee landlords, who knows what's that. So it'll be interesting to see how many polls are in that core versus that very large area. Red area of bare and
in Beaverdale, where the population is obviously a whole lot smaller. In terms of the other ridings, that are in our immediate sort of southern interior area range, I think looks like it's pretty much gone according to script. I really didn't think that the NDP was going to hold on to the South Okanagan like they did with Cannings. I thought that was going to be a difficult hold for them. So obviously that'll be a pickup in BC for.
And Linda Sankey is running a distant third.
Yes,
in that riding. It's certainly going to be a pickup for the Conservatives, which will make up for the loss potentially in Kelowna.
If they do.
And if that one does hold steady. It'll be interesting, as far as, because Kelowna does have portions of 2 ridings, that if, maybe the best thing for them, as far as the city is concerned, is one of each.
That's an interesting point.
We were talking to the mayor about this, to Tom Dias about this when his councillor Loyal Roldridge ran for the NDP and darn near won that Kelowna riding, which had a lot of downtown, that, yeah, maybe it would have been good for the city to have, you know, a couple of Conservatives and an NDP. You got somebody with the government, somebody that, you know, and now as it turns out, you got an independent as well. That you weren't expecting, but you know, that you could utilize, you know, different voices.
Very much hedging your bets in this
Exactly.
case, right? And,
exactly.
And probably not a bad. I mean, it's by accident, but it's probably not a bad strategy. Like I said,
and it is a sizable part of sort of the southern part of the city of Kelowna that has become part of the Okanagan Lake West South Kelowna riding now. I mean, obviously they don't have the downtown anymore, but they do have that rather large swath across the southern part of the city.
And if you look at it too, it's socioeconomically would be small C conservative. If you had to guess,
You would think so.
You look at the
Yeah.
Mission, South Kelowna is not that rural anymore.
No, no.
So
it's going to be interesting. We have yet to hear from, obviously, from any of the candidates because they're
counting the votes.
They're still waiting, you know, to officially declare or to have a comfortable enough lead, because no one wants to be the Chicago Times and elect Dewey when, you know, unfortunately.
Exactly.
No.
So, you know, you don't want to jump the gun there, but, you know, I think it's safe to say that a number of these results are certainly trending in a way that we can safely say, unless something
Well, and I think we saw that from the national picture when so early on in the game, a number of national news organizations they called the election as a Liberal minority when they saw the trends of how things were going. It's obviously tightened up a little bit, but then once again, I look at the numbers now.
163, 146.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, will that minority call hold, or will there be an actual real majority? But I do notice that all 343 seats have now reported. So it's now down to count the ballots in the box.
Well, you know, the interesting thing. Again, a dissolution in British Columbia, 14 Liberal, 14 Conservative, what was the number, 12 NDP, I believe?
20.
Yeah, 12 NDP and 1 Green, Elizabeth May's seat. Now, she's still leading that one on the island, but you look at the map, and there's a lot of blue in BC. There's a lot of blue.
Which is traditionally has been the case, because the real sort of strongholds for the Liberals, for the most part, as well as the NDP for that matter, has tended to be in and around Vancouver, the lower mainland. Like that's where they have tended to hold the seats.
John Turner, back in the day.
Exactly, and when it comes to interior BC, that is conservative territory, and it has been for such a long time that, you know, when you had a situation like a Richard Canning's down south winning for the NDP, it was a small spot of orange in a very large sea of blue.
You know, the interesting thing is too, and I, you know, just pulling the map out and looking, you know, and then doing some quick math. Elected or leading in 11 for the Liberals. Only 8 for the Conservatives. But you look at the map, and unfortunately, you know, folks, the map.
Let me describe it to you.
Blue everywhere. And as a matter of fact, let me just take a look here, because I think we might have, do we? No, I thought we had Stephen Fuhr confirmed, but we don't. That's tightening up a little bit.
Years and years ago, I'll be able to tell my story now. Years and years ago, when I was in university, I had to take cartography. I was a geographer. And it was an American election, and they put up the map of the U.S., and it was very similar. Right? It was all blue with some red, but the red won. And so I actually created a map that actually expanded the ridings based on the number of actual votes, the electoral votes in that case. And I think if you did that, Canada would look very different, right? Because if you look even in Ontario's blue, except for the GTA, pretty much. In Northern Ontario,
you get the small ridings that are red and the big ridings that are blue.
Well, I was going to say, and that's one of the reasons why in BC so much is blue, because some of those ridings are so physically large versus very compact ridings in downtown Vancouver, where
the Lower Mainland
where
is
there are a number of
mainly
them.
liberal
And that's a prime example of that is also in Ontario, where in and around the GTA.
Well, and look at Northern Ontario. Northern Ontario looks like a massive red, but of course I come from Sault Ste. Marie, and it's rock trees in Sault Ste. Marie and Sudbury and Bear.
Beaverdale.
Beaverdale. It's kind of Beaverdale.
No offense.
No offense. But that area is going red because it's resource based. So Algoma Steel makes steel. Steel got hit by tariffs. They're laying people off, right?
The Lower Mainland, and I'm talking west of Abbotsford, is mainly red, save for a couple of NDP and in Vancouver and one Conservative. The rest of it is mainly, and the only other blue there is the ocean. That doesn't count.
That doesn't count.
There is a lot of red, even going up the coast, up the up the coast for a bit into the Sunshine Coast and that area. Beautiful country, by the way. Looking for a job in PR.
Exactly.
Anyway, getting back to our region. So Stephen Fuhr, again, Kelowna, 49.5%, Tracy Gray 45.6, 70 out of 203 polls. Reporting South Okanagan, Similkameen West Kootenay, Helena Conans with an 1,100 vote lead over her Liberal counterpart, looking to make it 3 times a charm. Columbia Kootenay South Rockies, Rob Morrison has been declared elected or re-elected for the Conservatives, 54.2%, 120 of 310 polls reporting, has better than a 2-to-1 advantage. Kamloops Shuswap Central Rockies, Mel Arnold has now been declared elected or re-elected. He's going back to Ottawa, almost with a 2-to-1 edge, 57% to 32% over the Liberal. In Vernon, Scott Anderson has been declared elected. These are all CTV declarations, by the way. 55 out of 239 polls reporting, 52.3%, 1,750 vote lead over Anna Warwick Sears of the Liberals. Still no declaration from Kelowna, where Stephen Fuhr has that lead. Okanagan Lake West, Dan Albus now with a 500 vote lead over Juliette Seacott, who did lead that one early on for a few moments. Helena Conans I mentioned with a 1,200 vote lead. So we're getting a number of candidates elected. Still waiting on the South Okanagan, still waiting on Okanagan West and Kelowna to declare. The rest of them, at least according to CTV, have been declared.
South Okanagan is interesting because you got that mix of Okanagan and Kootenays, right?
Yes,
So it's always been a mix of conservative NDP. They're always swapping.
Well, Richard Canning, and such a nice man, such an honest face.
That's how I pick my candidate.
I don't see any resemblance to me. But that's Bill Barley's old stomping ground. And he, back Gold Trails and Ghost Towns with Mike Roberts and the old CHBC.
And that's why I say, I mean, for a long time in the interior, especially the southern interior, that was really the kind of the island. The island of NDP, surrounded by a sea of conservatives.
Just like Stephen Fuhr is looking, if this holds up in Kelowna. That one is starting to tighten up a bit. 1,200 votes. Federally, 162, 149. Again, 172 needed for a majority. There has been no indication at all that is achievable. We have not seen
No.
enough ridings flip. We haven't seen it.
Well, the
Now,
ridings
162 is the closest.
The ridings are in, and one would think, because of the way those things are switching, that they're actually accounting for some of that, right?
Yeah, of
They're-
course.
Yeah.
You're leading, and they're
Yeah.
switching who's leading.
Yeah.
So
But,
they're all in.
but even some of the local ridings. I mean, you look at the polls reporting at this point, and I mean, Okanagan, Lake West, South Kelowna, for instance, and I realize that Alvis does definitely have a lead there. 45 polls out of 220 reporting. There's still a number of votes to be counted. That's not to say that, you know, he's going to get surpassed or anything like that, but there are lots of ballots still to be counted at this point, which could have an impact on the overall national number in terms of seats. Whether or not it's going to be enough to pull back any of the Conservative leading seats, that's another question entirely. And at this point, a Liberal minority prediction seems to be holding as we sit right now.
Yeah.
You have to think, and just looking again at Burnaby Central, where Jagmeet Singh, the NDP leader, is
not even in the race.
Not even competitive right now.
Yeah.
3,800, 3,300. He's down at 1,800, just 20%. He's had a good run as leader. You have to think that his time as NDP leader is probably done.
Even if they had fared better, and possibly even if they had achieved party status with 12 seats, I think that there seems to be a bit of a feeling in the NDP that, okay, he's given the best that he could. Yep. I think this was his third election, I believe,
sure
leading the NDP. The party's position hasn't changed dramatically. I mean, obviously, they did much better electing 25 MPs when they, in terms of the last election, not at dissolution, but in terms of the last election, having elected 25 versus what they may end up with now. I would think that likely the knives will be out for him. I would think as party leader. I would think.
Yeah, no, exactly, and and it's a tough job because I really don't think. I think the NDP have sort of lost their way. I'm not sure they. I mean, they're the NDP. They stick to it, but you know you look at the NDP. You know, these are provincial. Maybe it's an unfair comparison, but the NDP that have actually done well provincially and even federally tend to take a very pragmatic socialism.
Yes. Oh yes. Yeah.
As opposed to
yeah.
you know, that sort of hard
Yeah.
line. And I think the NDP has always been split within their own ranks between Labour and environment, and you know, the Greens have siphoned off a bit of their environment vote.
And
so it's a tough job.
And I can understand some of the frustration this time around, given what they were able to achieve in supporting the Liberals and getting a number of programs passed that, quite frankly, I think the Liberals had to be dragged kicking and screaming
as always
to bring in. Yet, and it wasn't for lack of trying, because their campaign was.
But God help them if they don't.
But they in their campaign they brought this up time and time again, and quite frankly, I don't think that they've really got a lot of credit for that.
No, especially Jagmeet himself, right?
Yes.
I mean, he's getting thrown to the lions here, or
yeah.
will be.
But you know, by the same token, and I remember hearing this from actually a provincial cabinet minister from years back when I was on Vancouver Island, and the last person who I ever thought would have said something as cynical as this, in politics, you get elected to get reelected. And that's what it's all about. You know, when you get elected, it's with the aim to be reelected the next time. And when you lead a party that goes through 3 elections without any hugely substantive change, increase, getting closer to the finish line, or the desired finish line anyway, there'll be people in your party who'll say it's time for a change. And I think to a degree that's what Poilievre could have been facing if it hadn't been as close as it looks like it's going to be nationally.
Yeah.
It's, you know, we have yet to hear really from anybody. We have yet to hear from any of the leaders, from Mr. Carney or Mr. Poilievre. I mean, it's what do you say?
I think
it's too close. It's way too close.
Yeah.
Even though we have some income, and they may be, you know, as I say this, they may be addressing the media in their respective parties, you know, victory or otherwise. But it's going to be interesting. I would love to know what's going through two people right now. I'd love to know what's going through Pierre Poilievre's mind as he's sitting there going, we're going to come really close, but I'm in trouble personally. And I'd love to know what's going through Justin Trudeau's mind, knowing that, I mean, everybody wants to think the best of themselves and, oh, I wasn't that bad. And, oh, you know, I probably could have pulled this out, but he couldn't have, I'm sure.
No.
But I would love to pick his brain right now and find out exactly what he's thinking, you know, what the fortunes of his party have taken a drastic turn. If you would have put $50 on liberal minority in Vegas 6 months ago, you might be able to retire.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And you already are.
Yeah, I already am. Yeah. No, you know, I think in terms of Justin Trudeau, I think he would just try to say the same things. Like, you know, some of the things they did were part of the world events. Some of it he takes on himself. I mean, he did some things which were, you know, incredibly dumb in terms of, you know, dealing with, you know, the scandals that he did bring upon himself. Conflict of interest. Most people understand what that is, or should, the Prime Minister. You know, so I think you know, he shot himself in the foot, but it did undermine some of the things he did do going through COVID. I think, you know, full marks. I think he did about as good as any national government really handled the project. So, you know, in fairness, it wasn't that it was all bad. It wasn't necessarily 10 lost years, maybe the last 3 or 4. But
you almost have to give. Maybe this is too simplistic, but maybe I think you almost have to give governments a 1-year pass, you know, or at least a 6-month pass through the beginnings of COVID. And I mean, everybody had their ideas. No playbook, per se, you know, unless you want to go back to 1919. And actually, it played out very similar. But you don't know exactly what's going to work, what's not going to work. You throw a lot of stuff on the wall, you see what sticks. Every country did a little differently. Some did better than others, and you know, good on them or whatever. But I mean, again, I think everybody tried their best.
And
you know,
surprise,
so you always give them a pass.
Surprise. There's always, you know, revisionist history after the
Really?
fact, and after you move through this, that at the time there were so many people cheering how the government was handling it and providing, you know, subsidies and providing, you know, help for
people didn't lose their homes,
and you know, the government was being praised for it. You come out the other end after, you know, years in some cases of, you know, mandates that people didn't like, and they're so tired of all that, and now they're upset with the government, and all of a sudden it's like, well, you know, they did a terrible job looking after us during the
ran up a big deficit. How horrible!
Yeah, you know, when they were doing it, it wasn't such a bad thing to do, and the very nature of our politics, and it comes around every time we have an election. There's always revisionist history of, you know, I need this to fit my narrative. Whether it be the government in power, whether it be the opposition who's trying to unseat the government, whoever it is, they all have a different view of what happened in the past. You know?
Yeah, no, it's, you know, I remember, and I think the longer, to your point, we don't really know what's going to happen. In this case, we have a pretty good idea because we have Donald Trump, but, you know, so it could be a disaster. There lots of things occur. I remember saying to one mayor, having been in the job for a while, they said, well, oh my God, this is a real crisis. And I said, yes, it is, but we've had many, and we'll get through this one too. Right?
Oh, yeah.
It is a crisis.
Yeah.
Well, the sun always rises in.
Eventually.
The sun always comes up. Eventually. Exactly.
The one caveat I would put on that is, and I don't think that it's going to happen, and I don't think Canadians will allow it to happen, But the whole question of Trump saying he wants us to be the 51st state, that isn't necessarily the same as, you know, the sun will also rise, we'll get past this crisis. That could fundamentally change Canada if it ever happened. And as I say, I don't believe it will happen, and I don't think that Canadians will let it happen. But that's a very different change.
Of course, we're all old enough to remember the first Quebec separation vote.
Yeah.
And there was some real concern in the country that it could go, you know, a yes vote was possible. At the end of the day, it wasn't really that close. I think cooler heads, saner heads prevailed.
Well, I mean, the 1995 vote, and the reason I remember this so well is because
it was 52.
That one was incredibly close. And the reason I remember that so well is my wife at the time was pregnant with our daughter, and we sat outside putting off going into the prenatal class so we could hear on the radio what the result was going to be of that, because we were going, what are we going to be doing in the prenatal class, wondering how did that vote go. So I mean, yeah, you're right. I mean, we have had crises before, and we have lived through them, and we've dealt with them. And I think when it comes to dealing with Trump, I don't know if we're necessarily going to get off the roller coaster over the next 4 years, because as you started off by saying early on, Trump will do what Trump will do.
Yeah.
And I think that roller coaster is going to go up and down and up and down and up and down.
Honestly,
over the next
I don't even
4
think
years.
when he wakes up in the morning, he knows what he's doing.
He doesn't.
No.
You know.
And I think that's why you're seeing this vote, though, because I mean, as much as it got downplayed, you know, by the Conservatives in particular, I mean, the reality is he is a real threat. You know, and his making us the 51st state, you know, will it be by force? No, of course not. But he's trying to ruin the economy, right? And that is the way he'll do it. And at what point do we call uncle and say, okay, you know, and we don't know that yet. We've not been tested. And, you know, that is part of the reality.
As difficult as it's going to be for Canada to face the tariffs that Canada specifically will have to face, I think if there is such a thing as a saving grace in this, is that he's picked a trade war fight with the rest of the world as well, not just us. And there is the might of all these other countries that are also going to fight back in whatever way they happen to do it. And I think that helps Canada in that they're not doing it alone, one-on-one, because I think that would be a much, much, much tougher fight.
And I think as his support crumbles, you're starting to see some Republicans, at least, now speaking out. We've saw two just in the last 24 hours. And so I think hopefully the tide is somewhat turning, but he's there for 3 more years.
I was going to say
we're only at 100 days.
And he's crazy.
I think we've only gone through the first loop of the roller coaster.
Exactly.
I think there's a whole lot more track ahead of us here. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of a roller coaster,
how are we doing?
Look at some numbers. Dan Elbus has now been, according to CTV, declared elected with 69 of 220 polls reporting, but the trend is upward. 53.2% of the vote counted, or rather of the vote in his column, 484 votes. Juliette Secott, 40.2%, 4,145, but certainly more votes for a Liberal candidate in that side of the water than we have had in, I don't recall when.
Yeah, no, I think that's a surprising turnaround.
Yeah.
That she did quite well.
We're getting closer in Kelowna, the Kelowna riding. Stephen Fuhr at one point had about, what, a 1,800 vote lead. It's now down to 800. 105 of 203 polls reporting. And if I can get my page back, I'll go back that way. Here we go. That's Dan Elbus. We have 48.7%, 19,090. Tracy Gray with 46.4%, 18,206. So 884 vote lead. Trevor McAleese,
Far
4%
behind.
of vote. Interesting young man.
Mhm.
Really enjoyed my conversation with him. Very interesting young man with a lot of different ideas, and trying to be very inclusive. Trying to bring a lot of different people into the conversation, and he got 4% of those, 1,500 and almost 1,600 votes so far.
It's interesting here, and I think probably this is more reflective in the number of votes, even though she doesn't look like she's going to win for Juliette Seacoat in Okanagan Lake, West South Kelowna, that it seems a lot of that may have manifested through going into this, the feeling of there is going to be a kind of a second red wave, if you like, and being able to sort of ride the coattails of that. Fuhrer maybe not so much because it is so close, and of course he does have a track record of having been the MP, having defeated a Conservative to win it, and then being defeated by the same Conservative he's running against now to lose it. So maybe not quite as much of the being able to ride on those coattails for him in this race, but I think that may have very well helped get a lot of votes for Liberal candidates, even if they didn't win their ridings.
Yeah, no, for
well,
sure.
and if the demographic holds too, like, certainly that riding you think would be slightly older.
Yes,
The demographic of downtown Kelowna, and if in fact the 35 pluses are leaning in this election Liberal, that's obviously helped her to some extent, right?
Yeah.
But and we're seeing too, and some of the polling, take it for what it's worth, and we've had many conversations about this around the newsroom, is that traditionally you'll get, the younger voters will vote one way, older voters, vote another way. It seems like it's flipped.
It's flipped this year.
A lot of the older voters are voting Liberal. A lot of the younger voters, I'm talking 18 to 25, 30, going Conservative. Where usually it tends to be the other way around, and the younger voters don't vote anyway. By and large.
Yeah.
Well, I think the older demographic going for Carney is just the fact that he appears, like I said before, dour, stable. That would appeal at a time of instability to older voters, right?
Well, exactly, because they have a lot more to lose in a lot of ways. Where young people, they're looking for the change because at this point they're looking out there and they're going,
can't afford a house.
Can't afford a house. What about us? What do we do? Yeah, change what's been happening, because what's been happening hasn't helped us.
Yeah, for sure.
Pierre Poilievre, speaking of which, will we? Is narrowing the gap slightly. He's only about 1,200 votes behind. 1,300 votes behind in his riding. He would have to be safe. You would have to think, even if he loses.
And nobody's going to call it until the last vote's in.
No, true enough. But I'm just saying, if these results stay the same, he position-wise, as the head of the party.
If he loses his seat, I don't know. I think that could change. I think that could change the dynamic. If he loses his seat and doesn't win the election, even if it is only a Liberal minority government. If he wins his seat and it's only a minority government, I think, I can see him definitely staying.
30 more seats than at dissolution, but then again, 25-point lead on December 31st, too.
I think the pundits were talking about that. It was in the last week we got that, he made his seat. Nobody seemed to think he actually would, they thought it could be close. But the fact that it's this close is probably still a surprise. Nobody thought he could actually lose. In spite of the fact that, people had said, well, there's going to be a run.
Yeah, and I think that when the leader of what was viewed as the government in waiting gets knocked off in his own seat, I think that won't instill a lot of confidence in a lot of the rank and file Conservatives.
Yeah, we were waiting for a coronation, back at Christmas time.
Long ago.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is when you look at these rides and say, well, you have 50 or you have 100 of 200, one of the things that, certainly municipal election, I'm not sure it's true here, the breakdown of the polls.
Yes.
Really tell you, oh, I may be behind, but you haven't heard from Rutland yet.
Yeah,
And I always win Rutland, right? And it's hard to know
And I don't
what's
believe the
happening there.
parties know. I believe.
I don't think they do.
Yeah, and when it says 200, I'm assuming, when it says 200 or 130 out of 200 polls, that's each individual box is a poll.
Yeah, and
so
they've basically, I think, cranked them open at that point. They haven't necessarily counted all the ballots inside of them yet. They have the box and
they're hand counting too. Don't forget they're hand counting.
Not like efficient.
It's more efficient.
Not like efficient
municipal. I like the efficiency and the speed of pushing a button and saying, "Oh, there's your number. It's 10 after 7. Everybody's we just finished. We can go home now."
Yeah.
Have we seen any kind of indication of turnout yet at this point in terms of total numbers of voters?
I have
not seen that number.
Because I know it'll obviously be too early for an overall turnout, but I'm just wondering if they have any kind of numbers of voters yet.
I'm sure if Colin Dacre can hear our conversation from his area, he'd be able to give us national numbers of how many people have voted.
Because I believe it was around 17.5 million.
Something
votes.
like that
I think
last
that was
time.
last time, I think, which would have been the... Yeah, that because, and of course the last election was the 2021, which was called way early.
Yes.
By Trudeau. He had, I think, the previous one was 2019, I believe. So it was basically 2 years into the mandate that they called that election.
So here's an interesting number. So elected and leading, we're looking at Liberals 161, Conservatives 150. Elected, we're looking at Liberals 123, Conservatives 119. That's just, I mean, leading, you're probably looking at 95% of them will stay the same. A couple of them may flip.
At this
Block with
point,
19,
right?
NDP 2, Green 1, Elizabeth May. There a lot of interesting numbers. A lot of very interesting numbers. But the one that's most surprising, I think, is that 161, 150 Liberal minority. I don't think. No, I would assume. I mean, I know again in the newsroom we're making our predictions, and many, it was split between, Liberal majority, Liberal minority. I would have thought so many polls had.
Well, like
a majority.
162 was, I think, the aggregate.
Yeah.
The minimum.
Yes.
It was likely to be, so it's even almost within that range of the minimum. Right?
Yeah, they hit the bare minimum.
Yeah.
What's happening in Abbotsford?
Abbotsford,
It's just so weird. I'm just so
Yes.
curious.
You know
So
what?
say our friend
I
Young
can pull
is
Abbotsford up right now for you, Ryan. You ask and you shall get. Where is it? Is that Abbotsford? No, that's Chilliwack. There's Abbotsford. Other Abbotsford.
it would be that one, I think, isn't it?
Abbotsford South Langley. Mike DeYoung is running third.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
third.
and a somewhat distant third too, which is a bit of a surprise that
Gil
he's
Soukmon, the Conservative candidate, has been declared elected.
Oh, okay. Which is
the incumbent.
Well, I think the Liberal vote there in that riding is the split off of DeYoung. The
Liberals
tend not to do well in the Abbotsford Chilliwack area.
But it is interesting because the candidate who they did pick in that riding as the Conservative candidate, the party had recommended against him being the candidate,
and yet he's the incumbent.
And is he the incumbent in that?
A little eye beside him.
In that riding?
Yeah,
okay,
interesting.
then maybe that
That probably explains why they said no to Mr. DeYoung with no explanation.
Maybe
that was the explanation.
Yeah, at least that was the argument given when DeYoung was asked about, well, why didn't they? Because he wanted to be good. Just in case anybody out there isn't familiar, Mike DeYoung, the
Former finance
amongst other things, with the BC Liberal Party, very much a conservative, wanted to run for the Conservative Party in this election. He apparently was encouraged to put his name forward, and all of a sudden the party said thanks but no thanks, without giving him any explanation as to why they didn't take him. He hemmed and hawed about that for not that long, actually, and then said, well, I'm going to run as an independent. And on paper, at least, he looked like the perfect star Conservative candidate. And they decided to go with someone else instead of him. And that drew consternation. I mean, a very locally very popular politician. And that doesn't seem to have translated to that tonight.
I think there's some ridings where whatever the party is what they vote.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I heard a story of someone who said, "Oh yeah, my in-laws' friends voted, and they voted Conservative."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Oh yeah, well in this riding," they go, "They didn't know who Pierre Poilievre was."
Yeah.
So it was just, that's what I vote.
Yeah.
Well,
and that's probably happening here, right?
During the provincial campaign, I know a number of the candidates as they're knocking on doors. Well, Stephen Johnston was telling me this story, and I'm sure it was very familiar with everybody else as he's running as an independent. Oh, you're voting Conservative. What do you think of their leader? Oh, I think Pierre Poilievre's a great leader. No, he's the leader of the federal party, not the confusion. Here's an interesting, 23 cabinet ministers ran for re-election. Only one is trailing. And Kamal Akira in Brampton West is trailing. The others have been elected, or in two cases, in the case of Jonathan Wilkinson and Anita Anand, they're both leading. Only one cabinet minister is at the moment trailing. Now, probably Liberal safe ridings to one degree or another, but certainly in their area a tale of satisfaction with that. And I mean, you're usually fairly popular if you are a cabinet minister. Sure. Usually.
Yeah, that's right. For some reason why you're there, right?
But yeah, the one, and she's only trailing by 1,100 votes with most of the precincts in, so I'm sure that's going to be a defeat very soon. But yeah, I just thought that was an interesting. Usually, especially when you're turfing a government, so to speak, many times it's cabinet that's
going to happen. Right?
Yeah, it's cabinet that gets thumped. Things are tightening up big time in Kelowna. 135 out of 203 polls reporting. Stephen Fuhrer with 21,254, 48.2%. Tracy Gray 20,660, 46.8%. So that's
Quick math.
Yeah, 500 votes. Yeah, just shy of 600 votes.
So that's
it's
relatively.
I mean, it was close to 2,000 at one time.
Yeah,
now, and
absolutely.
the last time we looked, it was 1,000.
It's gone down, and then 800, 600. Yeah.
Yeah. Now time's running out. They certainly don't have all their. It's certainly not the beginning of the first period.
No.
We're getting late in the third.
It's the end of the beginning, or the most true.
Yeah. I mean, it's that. How much runway is left? How many votes are left to count?
Yeah, exactly.
How many do we need? Do we need 70%? I mean, right now you've got 46.8% of the vote. Do you need 65% of what's left to get over the top? And is that enough?
Yeah.
Do you have enough time? But
and again, I think it all depends on what's been counted and where it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. Where's your support?
Because if there's polls that are
where's your base?
Kind of like the same, then it.
Is it Beaverdale that's left?
Is it Beaverdale? That's the big question of the night.
There's certainly not a lot of votes to be counted there.
No.
Big White's the same. I don't know how
many
people
actually live there.
I
have a
don't
school
know.
and a fire department, and
just looking at some of the numbers in terms of votes here, 42.7% of the total votes have gone to the Liberals, 41.8% to the Conservatives. The Liberals have garnered about 5.2 million the votes, and the Conservatives have garnered about 5.1 million votes at this point.
So we're talking about that's 10,000.
That's about 10 million at that point. The Bloc Québécois has about 900,000. The NDP has about just under 700,000.
That's
votes.
another 1.6, 1.7, so we're talking 12 million have voted so far?
Yeah.
Or 12 million votes have been counted.
But yeah.
It could be a stretch to get to 17.
Because I believe it was what, 62.6%
62.6% in
was
2021.
that was the turnout last time. Yeah.
2021.
And that had gone down.
We had
from the
67%
previous
in
one.
2019, but voter fatigue. You know, you're going back to the polls again.
Yeah,
that was different.
Yeah.
And it's COVID.
Yeah.
Of course. And we also had a provincial, I can't remember if the provincial was just before the federal. So at least in BC, it was, you know,
it was not.
voter fatigue like crazy.
Yeah,
Nationally, we're looking at 160 for the Liberals, 151 for the Conservatives, 23 for the Bloc, 8 NDP, and Elizabeth May. That's elected or leading. And I believe they have already declared, they've already declared Elizabeth May as elected, which is good. She's been a workhorse for that party for years.
Yeah.
So a couple of hours into this, and the Liberals are flirting with trying to get to be a majority, but there's still a good 12 seats away.
They need 12.
I don't know if they're going to be able to pick up 12 seats at this point, given that that all 343 seats have reported in at this point.
Where are you going to find? They're certainly not finding them in Alberta.
Yeah.
I think if they could keep over the 160, then they've done well tonight.
Yeah. But once again, with the NDP currently standing at 8, that still doesn't give them enough to be, or to, shall we say, to govern like a majority.
No.
They still need
Some
the
bloc.
help from the Bloc, and that brings us back to what we talked about earlier, and the type of scenario that I don't think either the Conservatives or the Liberals necessarily would want to be put in that position, having to turn to the Bloc for support.
I don't think, nationally, I don't think this is healthy.
No.
One or the other in this kind of crisis you'd want to see.
Yeah.
When you said, we haven't heard from anyone yet, well, first off, it's too close.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
But secondly, depending on how the outcome, you have to watch what you say,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because you may be courting those votes to survive.
Yeah,
So it's going to be. I'm sure they're.
You don't want a Bush Gore situation where
Angling chads?
where one walks out and says, "I concede," only to come back and say, "Well, no, I don't quite concede because."
Yeah, exactly.
I'm still in this.
Yeah, exactly.
The margin is narrowing in Kelowna, with 150 out of 203 polls now reporting Stephen Fuhr with 47.9%. That's 22,381. Tracy Gray with 47.1%. 21,972. 400 votes. Just over 409 to be exact.
Yeah.
Well, there we go.
That every time we get 3 or 4 polls or 5 or 6 polls, the margin slides to an extra 100 or 50 or whatever the case may be.
The poll aggregators did have them literally
neck and neck,
pretty much
tied 49% each going into this. So they're
not a big surprise then.
Yeah, no, they're not surprising anybody yet. And it's interesting with that riding, because like when you look back at the provincial election, like we were talking about earlier, and how close it was between the NDP candidate and the BC Conservative candidate in virtually that same ride, not exactly the same boundaries, but pretty much that same riding, where you had a left of center candidate, for want of a better term, against a right of center candidate. And I do think that in Canada, I think the Liberals and the Conservatives, for the most part, they're centrist parties. I mean, one might be slightly to the right, one might be slightly to the left, but as world standards go in terms of political parties, we don't exactly have extreme parties as our main two parties. I think the night is not over for these two. I don't think.
No,
not by a long shot.
No,
you know?
And I'm counting, if my math is correct, I'm counting 23. I think I said 23 Conservative, 19 Liberal. Something along those lines. Leading or elected in BC. It might have been, I don't want to say the R word, but could we be seeing a recount potentially there? I mean, the way things are, sliding that way.
Yeah. I mean, I think that at this point it's too early to say that, but if this holds, I think that if it's really close, I'm sure that the one it's not close enough for will ask for it to be recounted.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. I mean, I know provincially it's 0.5%. I believe that's
was it 100 votes or something?
It was very close.
Yeah,
I think it was wasn't it the second closest in the provincial ridings, and I mean, this looks like it's going to go down to the wire, just as was predicted by the poll aggregators.
Yes, Helena Conans has now been declared the winner.
Third time lucky for her.
Yes,
there we go.
Yes. Finally gets her seat.
Yeah.
She wins by 2,400 at the moment, with almost all the polls now reporting. When I said, and I just noticed on this, they have Linda Sankey as incumbent. Now, she's not the incumbent. The party is the incumbent.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about the Abbotsford,
I think that's the same.
It was
I think that's the same instance.
It wasn't the
party is the incumbent.
It was the
Conservatives
party,
held
which
the seat.
again, why Mike DeYoung was
and why
getting that seat.
And why the riding association recommended against him as their candidate.
Yeah.
And as it turns out,
he
won it for them anyway.
So as it turns out, the minor controversy in the South Okanagan with Helena Conan's nomination, just here you go.
Yep.
Good luck. Didn't bite her.
No.
I don't think in this election, given the timing, I'm not sure that it's going to be so much of an issue. We saw it in provincial elections where people got handed ridings, and some people hold it like time out. You could have had a proper. And I think that's what gets people's backup. But in this kind of election, I think everybody, as you said, they should have been ready. But everybody was scrambling. So I couldn't see that being necessarily.
Well, I think on the provincial side, some of that was, when BC United pulled out, and John Rustad gave the indication that, we're going to take the weekend, we're going to go through, we're going to pick the best candidate. Never happened. And I think that's what got people's backs up, where a situation like this, nobody's folding. It's just,
and with such a short campaign, it was only a 5-week campaign. It was the shortest possible campaign that they could have had. There really wasn't going to be time to hold any sort of a really sort of substantial. Now I know they tried, but I think it was even before the writ got dropped, for the Lake Country Vernon Monashee riding, where they did have a contest, and Anderson won that contest. But I think there were a number of seats or a number of candidates for both parties that were, in essence, named to it. I mean, Fuhr being one, I don't believe that he actually had to fight any kind of nomination.
No. But he talked to me about the rigorous vetting process that most parties, do. Again, that was the one argument against the BC Conservative Party, was that their vetting process was haphazard.
Less rigorous?
Less
rigorous?
Less than rigorous.
Yes. Well, when you lose 3 MLAs within how long after the election? I mean, they after they were elected, all of a sudden 3 of their sitting MLAs end up leaving the party. You got to wonder about the vetting process.
The lead is now down to 349.
Wow.
With 43 polls left to count.
Yeah.
Stephen Fuhr is is probably a little anxious.
I'm sure Tracy is too. I would imagine.
More hopeful there. There's one hoping the referee blows the whistle and time in.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a soccer game. It's out of time, right? Come on, blow the whistle.
The before and after picture of the nails will be rather interesting as to how much they were chewing.
Yeah, exactly.
Just waiting to see if, because the other ridings have already been declared, I haven't had any word yet as to whether...
There's quite substantial differences, though, if you look on the, this is, nobody's calling this.
No. But I think it appears that the other 6 ridings in our immediate area, they've all been declared.
CTV's already declared them for the Conservatives. And Helena Conan's down in the South Okanagan, Rob Morrison in the South Kootenays, Mel Arnold, Frank Caputo up north, Scott, help?
Goldsberry? No, I'm thinking of the...
too many names.
Yeah.
Cunningham?
Too many names of candidates.
Scott Anderson.
Yes, that's right.
Vernon.
Yeah, in Vernon. Yeah.
It's been a long night, folks.
Yeah.
And Dan Albus in Okanagan Lake West, South Kelowna.
Yeah.
That's
going to take some getting used to that name, I tell you.
Have to put an extension on his business card.
So I don't know. Central Okanagan's Milkameen Nicola.
That's a mouthful.
That was
Try and put that on the back of your jersey.
I was going to say I think that's a 2-line jersey jersey
sure.
name.
But I haven't heard yet whether any of our reporters in any of the markets have had a chance to talk to the winners yet, whether they've made themselves available or they're waiting for the national map to confirm itself. Although I think it's pretty clear by now that it's going to be a Liberal minority. Minority, wrong word.
Yeah.
Just a matter of, again, who's holding the balance of power. And right now it looks like it will be the Bloc Québécois, the NDP only leading in an 8 or elected in 8. Which would bring the Liberals up to 170.
And if they can get Elizabeth May to join them, they're still 1 vote shy of that being able to rule like a majority. Because with the NDP with 8 and the Green with 1.
Yeah, it looks like it's going to go late into the evening as far as determining the Kelowna riding is concerned. So again, the national map, it will be a Liberal minority government, at least on the face of it. The Liberal Party has resurrected from almost dead several months ago to winning the most seats, winning the most votes, but not quite getting enough to form a majority government. 172 required, 162 leading or elected for the Liberals, 149 for the Conservatives, 23 for the Bloc Québécois, and it appears as if they will hold the balance of power, 8 for the NDP, 1 for the Green Party, their leader, Elizabeth May. Just want to do a quick, before we wrap this up, Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party, is trailing in his riding by 1,600 votes, with about almost half of the polls counted there. And Jagmeet Singh is also trailing in his riding. Last report, he was 3rd. And I will pull that up eventually. There it is. And he is still 3rd, a poor 3rd, as he's got 4,000 votes. The Liberal with 9,000, the Conservative with 8,000. So it's safe to say that Jagmeet Singh is going to go down to defeat this evening in his home riding of Burnaby Central. Across our coverage area, it's a virtual Conservative sweep. In the 2 Kamloops ridings, Frank Caputo and Mel Arnold have both been re-elected. In the Columbia, it's Rob Morrison. Scott Anderson in Vernon, Helena Conan's, her 3rd try is a charm. She wins in the South Okanagan. Dan Albus re-elected in Okanagan Lake West, South Kelowna. The only riding still in doubt is Kelowna. Tracy Gray and Stephen Fiore neck and neck, 349 votes separate those two, with about 38 polls still to be counted. We'll have all of those results on castanet.net. Our live coverage is coming to an end. Wayne Moore for Ron Mattiussi, former Kelowna City Manager, and for a while the interim manager in West Kelowna, among other municipalities, and Summerland, and Lytton, to say that. And Al Waters, what's your new title?
Same title as it was, opinions editor at Castanet.
Opinions editor, and boy, does he have opinions.
Oh, yeah.
For everybody that has made this broadcast possible across the entire South Okanagan, here in our studio, Curtis, great as usual in producing the show. I'm Wayne Moore saying good night, and we will keep you up to date on Castanet as to the official results throughout the evening. But for Ron, for Al, for myself, and for everybody else, thanks for tuning in. Good night.